All right, let's see who shows up. Uh, we got one person. All right. So that means we started. I don't have any plans for this one at all. So just doing office hours, I suppose. All I've been doing recently is reading Joseph Needham, Science and Civilization in China. Wow. And that's pretty much it. It's really good. It's uh it's one of the best books ever. I mean, it's extremely long if you count all the volumes as one book, which I think is probably the way to do it. And I've got the baby strapped to my chest here, so she might be chiming in. So I've been doing that. Revolutionary shit going on in Northwest Africa. Interesting. Wow, wow, wow. Probably gonna get more and more of the Rainbow NATO Brigade calling for de-Nazbolification of Northwest Africa and Latin America, and that's just the future for us here is a full-on global fascism. Yeah, I don't really see any way around that. Although probably the most revolutionary thing, and as much as everyone hates to admit this, is the fact that Donald Trump is still polling in a way where it would imply that he's going to win, even as they, crack down on him even more. I think there's another indictment. So he might, imagine what'll happen if he wins while in prison. I don't know if it'll be allowed to happen. We'll see. Who knows? But that would certainly be one of the only ways to throw a wrench into the machinery of all this, because no one in the state wants to deal with that as a possibility. No one in either party wants to deal with that as a possibility, even though it becomes more and more likely. And I would note that back in 2020, I was already saying that it would be great for Trump's long-term prospects to lose in 2020, considering that all of the COVID austerity would be placed on the Democratic Party, which is exactly what happened. I mean, pretty much Trump's pretty much escaped blame for the state of the economy we're in now, and he can just say, "Oh, look, all of this was Biden's fault," and that was really good for his long-term prospects. So, and I remember saying this on while all this shit was going down in 2020, and people were really mad at me who were Trump supporters. But I was like, if you were like actually a Trump supporter, him winning in 2020 would have been fucking terrible for the long term prospects of MAGA as a movement. And I think that's pretty obvious now. I think the polls in general are showing that more and more people, as opposed to less and less, have become fed up with all of this and will vote for Trump just to throw a wrench in the machine, just as a pure fuck you to the state. They will elect the clown orange Cheeto man again, and I think that's cool. I think that's probably for the best. I don't think RFK Jr. is serious in his opposition. I think that he will do what Bernie did in the same exact way, and it won't be enough. However, if it was RFK versus Trump for the presidency, that would be pretty interesting. Although I don't see that happening. Obviously, none of the other Republican candidates even have a chance of unseating Trump, not even remotely. I can't believe DeSantis people even exist. They're like, hey, being chatty. I don't know. There's nothing. What else is there to talk about? There's nothing changed. Nothing's really going on. I'm just waiting for y'all. Any of y'all want to come on and suggest a topic? We can discuss that. But I don't really have much to say. I feel like I've already said everything that I'm ever going to say. I just repeat myself. It's just like at this point, I even get bored with how obvious everything is. I'm reading Joseph Needham, and he's like, and then here, and like, here's the problem with. Hey there, Joseph Needham will be like, hey, here's the problem with the reification of science, and then also the kind of naive, one-sided rejection of science, is that people need to read William Blake. That's right, baby, William Blake. Read Blake or go to hell. It's that simple. They're making little pterodactyl sounds. I don't know. Have a baby. That's way better than any of this shit. Yeah. Woo! I don't know. I just spend all my day making baby sounds at the baby. Wow! 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 All right. This is just gonna be baby Foley unless someone comes on. So one of y'all, it's on you. I'm not in charge of making the content good. That's your work. I'm just here to capitalize off of your efforts. Oh man. I don't know. Like, what else is there to even talk about? Barbie? I don't know. Anyway, the title of this one, "All Rivers Meet the Sea," is just a Chinese proverb that Joseph Needham uses a lot to describe science. That essentially he refutes the Spenglerian notion of these sort of specific civilizations that have their specific rise and fall, in favor of a universal history in which all of these rise and falls contribute to each other. And so there's actually there is like a directionality to history in the sense that all of the civilizations that have risen and fallen before our own have all contributed to the potentialities of our own. So like it's like there's this notion that like there's something unique about Western civilization that it just simply cannot be translated or inherited across the world was more of a argument people could make, and I think at least defend in the 20th century. But obviously, at this point, the Chinese have there's no technological or science gap between the West and the East anymore. And I would say that the East is more advanced in their societal structures than us because they adopted all this technology, but they like did it in a more intelligent way in the sense of like having high speed rail networks is more efficient for an economy than to have the highway system. Things like that. So like their investments in tech are going to accelerate their own improvements. Whereas we are just like struggling to maintain a position that we're losing every second of every day. I posted that a quote from the ASPI about their fears of, well, like, people say China, they don't have any new technology, they're not doing it, they're not innovating. But the truth of the matter is that all of the like Five Eyes intelligence agencies who are surveilling technological advancements across the world in order to keep them under the dominion of like Five Eyes hegemony are extremely terrified because the Chinese are leading in 37 out of 44 of the next gen technologies that they outline in their report. A lot of these have to do with things like 5G networks, etc., quantum computing, all of this. Like effectively, we're the the intelligence state has already admitted that they're effectively fully compromised by Chinese hardware anyway. Like if the Chinese put any or are capable have back doors in their manufacturing here, then they've already been able to infiltrate. You know, there's like this whole thing where it's like, oh, the Chinese have already taken over. And it's like, yeah, they have. Get used to it, pal. All right, I got a fan here named Rosicrucian11. So what's up, my friend? What can I do for you?
Hello?
You're on. Howdy.
Hey, can you hear me? Because I'm driving,
Yeah,
so
I
I'm
can
not
hear
sure
you.
if this sounds okay. Yeah, so I only have like 5 minutes. I might hop in later to keep talking more, but it's kind of related to what you just mentioned about China.
Yeah,
I mean, I just went to a business trip um, like a few months ago when they first opened up, and I met a lot of like AI companies, and what they were saying was that the AI in the West uh, seems more advanced because it's machine learning, but in China they like can't have the AI just say bad things about the CCP and all that, so they don't really use machine learning. All the knowledge mapping and all the points
I'm sorry, you're cutting out now. I've lost you. Oh, now you're
of
back.
AI. Whereas in the States and in the West, it seems like it's just for a show. It's just for hey, look at how cool my new toy is, when it's
Yeah, I
not
mean,
really that beneficial.
the thing is that like the AI that is beneficial is like already being implemented and has been being implemented for a while. There's just been a big like public relations campaign almost with like the Chat GPT stuff and all the chatbots and like these sorts of things that seem like they're like very innovative or whatever. But there's obviously tons of problems with these. Like all of the I was just reading an article like a day or two ago about what they were calling hallucinations in the output of these large language models, where they just like make shit up. Obviously, like inventing, citing a scientific study that doesn't exist just by because these things like can't actually determine fact from fiction. A large language model can't do that. It's like assuming like people can do that. If you feed a historical document into Chat GPT in the large language model here, it's just more language. It can't make a qualitative determination between these things. That's why also you're saying that like in China, right, they wanted to make the qualitative determination that the Chinese Communist Party is like the sovereign and like it is the good, etc. So like they're making they have to enforce this qualitative decision. But we do the same thing when we have it. So it's like, hey, we can't have the like Chat GPT thinking that the protocols of the Elders of Zion is a legitimate document or whatever, because it can't tell the difference between these things. So you have to train it, and you have to train it by setting like manual weights on things like that, which is also done by just like feeding these the outputs to like just like fucking wage laborers, right? Like there was another article I read about. There's like these farm it's like captcha farms for AI where they'll have like in order to set the weights regarding like things being racially insensitive, et cetera, et cetera. The AI can't determine that for itself. Qualitative distinctions are purely socially constructed. So,
Yeah, 100% agree.
but
But
like
yeah,
where
go.
AI has more interesting uses is in things like we already use AI for so many things. Like if you're using a DAW to like make music, like all of the like having a simulated like a simulated reverb pedal or something is the same thing as AI. All of these things are basically just AI, machine learning, blah 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 blah. There's it's not like as much of a step change as people are pretending it is. It's kind of like a hype cycle that we need right now in order to feel like we're ahead of the new wave of technology, even though none of this matters. It's sort of like with the metaverse when they did that, and they're like, "Oh, we have NFTs. This is the fucking bleeding edge of technology," and it doesn't really do anything. I don't know. I got pissed off with the Bitcoin people with my just pretty standard take at this point that the Bitcoin in no way challenges Western imperialism, and in no way avoids like state capture. That the hashing function underneath all of these things was designed by NSA cryptologists, and that there's really like no reason to think that this thing is some liberatory technology that the deep state accidentally gave us or something. it's just absurd, this notion that like your Bitcoin or your cryptocurrency is safer than your US dollar deposits is ridiculous considering how many Bitcoin and cryptocurrency seizures there have been by things like the Secret Service and the IRS, et cetera, et cetera.
100%. 100%. And one more thing, like one more observation about like my recent trip is that, you know, they're workaholics. Like it's pretty scary how much they work. Like it was a Friday night. I just wanted to go out, and in Beijing at like 11 p.m. It was rush hour of everyone leaving their office at 11 p.m. So, you know, I just sometimes it's confusing because they work so much and they honestly sometimes seem pretty miserable because of how much they work. And everyone plays like these mobile games where they spend a shit ton of money on them. And I even saw like a couple at a bar on a date playing like a League of Legends on their phone together.
Yeah,
Not
I
saying a
mean,
word. You know, I guess my question is, and if you couple that with the fact that they don't really believe in God or religion, what's driving them? You know, that's the question that's on my mind.
what's driving them is the fact that their lives have gotten better than their parents and their grandparents and their great
Yeah.
grandparents, and that's what's driving them. I mean, that's what drove the American economy when it was like developing at the same rate in like the 19th century, early 20th century. It's not that it's like it's not like the current state of China right now is the perfect utopia and the perfect
Yeah.
society. It's more just that they have a trajectory that's leading towards more that like distributed affluence. Like they have less of a wealth gap and things like that, and they may be working a lot, which I think they should probably like I think they should lower their working week, but they're doing that because they make money. You know what I mean? Like people in
Yeah.
America also work ridiculous hours. It's just that they don't even make like enough to survive by doing that. So part of like, I guess what their work ethic comes from is the fact that like it actually pays out. Like if you're actually making decent money, you often are like, yeah, I want to get these overtime hours because you actually are making decent money doing it. But in America, no one wants to work more because it doesn't matter one way or the other. What you want is like a salaried position, and then you want that to go up, and you also want to do as little as possible. One thing I've been thinking about though is that there's been a big movement in Ireland and Iceland, anyway, out of all the countries in the world, to implement the 4-day work week. So to basically create the 3-day weekend on a perpetual basis. There's been like a bunch of pilot programs for this. And I think the most telling bit of data about all of this, like when they've actually implemented the 4-day work week at these corporations, is number one, there's no decline in productivity whatsoever because there's already so much non-work, so much waste that happens in these sorts of jobs. Like if you're working in an office, like you're not actually working 5 days a week, like it's kind of formally presented as such. But everyone knows that on Friday you can't get shit done after lunch, right? So they just said, okay, we'll get rid of that. But then at the end of this pilot program, most of it, like the vast majority, I think 80+% of the companies that participated in it kept it because it also helped them to recruit more talent. Obviously, if you want to, you'd be like, if you're if you're comparing jobs, and it's like, hey, this one makes roughly the same amount of money as this one, except I work one less day every single week. Obviously, that's a pretty compelling choice. Like, I mean, I'd rather make I like then it's like how much is that day actually worth? And what's interesting is they found that basically that day was worth to people like $20,000 a year. So like they were like, hey, if we go back, like if and none of these corporations could go off of this 4-day work week after they did it because they said, hey, if we're going back to the 5-day work week, I want a fucking $20,000 raise. Uh, so I think that's like an interesting proposal. I think that like we should probably implement that. Obviously, there's no one really pushing for that. It's not even like an issue in the public consciousness, but I think it will be more and more over the next like 5 to 10 years. Um, that's one thing I'm interested in is just like free time, more so than the question of like reshoring manufacturing, anything like that. I think a lot of that is kind of impossible at this point. What America could use its geopolitical power, its position in the world economy right now is to lower working hours across the board. That would be the most interesting thing it could do. I think that if we did that, that China would adopt that too. It's really they don't have a need to, like they don't like if they adopted that and we didn't, then it would hurt them more than it would hurt us because they actually produce goods, and we, for the most part, do not. So. I think that's one of the
Yeah,
most
I mean,
interesting proposals on the books, though.
yeah, they're basically working to produce for themselves and for the rest of the world. So
Yeah, I
yeah,
mean, we we produce like all like the fucking alfalfa, I guess, all the grass that we ship over there for and like corn and shit for their cow feed and stuff like that. Like, there's some things in which we actually provide a massive amount to the rest of the world, but it's not really the bedrock of our economy. Um, like if you really look at it, like what are the our number one export is financial services, whatever the fuck that means.
yeah. I mean, financial services are supposed to be sort of like the lubricant between like industry and
You
uh,
just be read that as emails.
yeah,
We
exactly,
produce a lot of emails at the email
exactly.
factory.
Instead, it's like the biggest part of the GDP, I think, in the U.S. So
Yeah, it
it's
is.
ridiculous, really.
It is. Like, I don't know. I say this all the time, but it's literally something that drives me somewhat mad. And I just walk around and I go, "What are you all doing? What's everyone doing? What do you do? What is everyone doing?" Because it's not like, I don't know. I'm in a post-industrial city, so I can drive through like the abandoned factory parts, like where like there used to be a canal where they'd move like fucking steel and shit like that down the canal, and those are like the factories were are all like empty. There's a lot of them are still empty. There's just nothing being done with all these old brick buildings. They're trying to like turn them into housing for people going to like medical school. Basically, that's all we got around here is just like the whole industry of like education, finance, insurance, real estate, etc. And that's pretty much it. Like if you, or you can, there's also some like more like precision manufacturing for things like Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, etc. Lots of these military industrial complex jobs, or making like medical devices, etc. That's pretty much what's left around me. So I don't know. I just look around like, what is everyone doing? But obviously, there's also a huge contingency of people here who are just on welfare, which is basically like being bribed. Like the whole point of welfare is just to bribe people to remain like to stay put. Like it's cheaper ultimately to give them a pittance to stay put where they are, so they don't cause problems. That's like really the whole point of the welfare state is just to keep people compliant at a low level. If you removed that, then we'd have a fucking revolution. So it's kind of funny to me, because like the real conservatives then in that sense are the people who want to preserve the welfare state because the welfare state is what keeps us from having a revolution. And but then there's the irony of like the anti-communists who are like, we need to get rid of the welfare state because it's communism. And if they actually succeed in doing that, they would cause a communist revolution almost immediately. So that's the irony that I see everywhere.
Yeah, 100%. And I live in Kuwait, like which is a very like oil-rich country, and I work in
Yeah,
finance in Kuwait. So we're basically just our capital allocators. So we invest in like U.S. hedge funds and
yeah.
and U.S. markets, and dude, it's a joke. Like they make more money off of the fees than from actually generating alpha. It's absolutely ridiculous, and also you know. Um, I lost my train of thought here, but yeah, it's yeah.
It's just ridiculous.
I,
Yeah,
I
pretty
remembered.
much everything.
So they what they do is I noticed they sort of give you like their outlooks and like the narrative, and then they do everything in their power to fulfill that narrative. Really, it's like
Yeah.
they make things up as they go, and they try to actually fulfill their outlooks. Really, that's what's going on.
Yeah, it's like that's our central planning is really this type of like distributed planning, but amongst the same class. So it doesn't appear that there's like a central plan because there's not one single place to go. I mean, I guess you could say the Bank for International Settlements is literally like the central planner of the global economy, which is true in a lot of ways. But they're just setting like targets, and then they allow, in the same way, this is like how fascism generally just organizes, like in Nazi Germany, for instance, like all of the various SS, fucking I forget what the groups, all the different SS groups were somewhat autonomous. Like they were given goals, but how they carried out those goals or achieved them was left entirely to the discretion of those specific things. So it's kind of like if you think of like the Führer as the central bank, and then they give directives for like reaching certain benchmarks down the chain. How those things are gotten to is up for debate, or up for the struggle to discover of all of these individual people. It's competitive, but it's a competition with under the same team for the same goals. That's basically how things work in the West. So it doesn't appear to be centrally planned. It's like we put these targets like with climate change or whatever. Like, oh, we need to reduce carbon emissions by to this degree or whatever. So this is the target that's been set at this sort of central location, but we're not going to give a specific plan on how to do that centrally. We're going to make it so that everyone takes responsibility towards meeting this end, and that's how we do our planning. It's like World Economic Forum, et cetera, et cetera. So you're right. Like they do just make it up, and then they just like try to fulfill the thing that they made up.
100%. But yeah, it's always a pleasure talking to you. I have to bounce, but I'll join probably in an hour or so if you're
It's all
still
good.
on.
I probably won't be, but it's nice talking to you, man. Peace.
Okay, you too. Peace.
All right, Golod. I've had you on before, I believe. Sounds familiar. How's it going?
Oh, hello.
What's up?
Not too much. How you doing? Oh, you want
Pretty
some more
good.
orange, baby? Okay.
You got a baby too. I got a
That's
baby.
right. Well, mine's
God
more
damn.
it's more like a toddler, but I still call it baby. Oh dear. Here you go.
Well, anything I can do for you, or anything you want to talk about
Oh,
specifically?
we were talking about exporting finances. Oh dear. What's the matter with that? Or exporting financial tools. Good lord. She might not let me talk actually.
It's
It was
all right.
a risky venture. I'll hop on maybe later if I can.
All right. Okay.
Peace.
Good luck, man. Classic. Oh, my baby's looking up at me like, "Hey, what are we doing here?" Hi. Because I'm just pacing in circles around my apartment. I don't know. Financial services. It's fucking crazy. I don't know. I know a lot of these like financial services type people or whatever, and they kind of just like if you like don't immediately, it's like a bunch of con men. I don't know. Like they all believe in it themselves though. Like obviously, like you do a pretty bad job of working in like Wall Street or anything like that, if you didn't fundamentally believe in what you were doing or that it's like valuable in some way. So they all do believe that, like they just kind of take that as like self-evident. And if you like ask any questions about it or like point out anything else, like they tend to not really have much of a response aside from like, kind of suggesting that like if you knew better, then you'd make more money. Because it's like that's the whole notion is that if you just like understand the economy better than someone else, that means that you make more money than them. And that's like kind of like George Soros even says this, right? That it's like um, the markets are just a way of redistributing assets from dumb people to smarter people, in the sense of if you can do stuff like Soros did with like the British pound, if you're smarter than the policymakers, then you can make money off of their mistakes or whatever. So that's every time I talk to these people, they're always like, well, if you know so much about this, why don't you just make more money? It's like, why don't you just, if you know that hedge funds are a bunch of frauds, why don't you make a hedge fund and make more money than them? And it's like, that's basically the sort of argument that's had. There's not really a notion of logos in that at all, because it's purely based on will. It's like whatever strong survives, whatever strong conquers, and that's like the proxy for any sort of discourse in language. They say if you like, let's see your portfolio. That's all that really matters. All right, Alethea, I'll add you. So I was talking to a bunch of like cryptocurrency people. There's so much money in that space. It's fucking crazy the amount of people who are employed right now and just making various cryptocurrency schemes. It's like literally abysmal. Like all of those people like are generally pretty smart. Like it would be pretty smart to like be working on those things in the first place. But they could all be doing literally anything else. be doing literally anything else and it would be more productive. I'm just like, why don't you just fucking, like do like work on some drones or some shit and like farming technologies or like fabricating something, like do something. Like, why is there so much time and money being spent on creating more derivative finance speculative financial assets like fucking Bitcoin and cryptocurrency? It's all pointless. I don't know. It literally drives me insane. And most of the people actually, I don't know, they work on it and they get skeptical about it or cynical about it because they see how it actually works on the inside. They're like, oh wait, I'm just working for a massive rug pull. This is just a rug pull, but I'm on the inside, so it doesn't really make sense for me to do anything about it because I'm going to make a ton of money when they pull the rug, but all these retail investors are going to get fucked. What are they going to do about it? Like, it's not illegal, so it is what it is. Like Sam Bankman-Fried got off on the FTX shit, and then while on house arrest, he did another fucking rug pull. He made like 100 mil. Like that's it. That's it. I guess if that's the Ubermensch then, right? Like that's in this sort of fascism is like if you can make a ton of money scamming, then you deserve it, and you're like the God King. That's it. So that's why you see so many of the like fringe right guys. They just kind of are like, "Wait, I'm just trying to like get rich here. So how do I do that?" And then they get into this shit. And then when they do get rich, they're like, "Oh, yeah, I don't really give a fuck about anything else. I'm rich now. I'm gonna go move to Florida, move my shit off the coast. I'm gonna go live in the I just bought Jeffrey Epstein's island. Like we're Gucci now." Anyway, Alethea, you're up. I'll talk to you about whatever you want.
Yeah, what's up? Can you hear me?
Yeah, what's up?
Oh, perfect. Yeah, I was maybe that's too off topic right now, but I've been hearing you talk about literature quite a lot. And
Yeah.
especially now that I've reading like late Heidegger, right? And his like emphasis on poetic language. I've been wondering about your opinion on how much literature, world literature influences the kind of historical process in comparison to like philosophical texts, right?
I would say I think all philosophical texts are commentary on literature or poetry. So, like for instance, you're talking about late Heidegger or Heidegger in general is a commentator on Holderlin. Like Holderlin is like where he gets everything.
Right,
Um,
Hölderlin and Rilke.
yeah, exactly. So I think that it's like there's like poetry would be what's called in some discourses world disclosing speech. So it's not making an argument or presenting a case. It's recreating like the world. If that like it's a creative process and not an analytical process. So it's like reading a poem is meant to be like looking out your window, like it's like recreating the fucking world, So it does that in order for you to then analyze the poem and then apply that analysis to the way that you would say read the world events or things that are happening in the world. So you have like poetry always moves faster than philosophy. Philosophy is constantly a step or two, if not five, behind poetry in explaining the sort of changes that poets first recognize and portray in their own works. So, that's why poets are always like ahead of their time. It's not that they're ahead of their time. It's more like, as Marshall McLuhan put it, they're the only people who are like of their time and able to replicate it, recreate it in front of themselves for in the present moment. The philosophers can't analyze what's happening in the world right now. They can only analyze things that have already happened. They are generally at a loss to explain the present. The people who are seeking to explain the present are poets or like sci-fi writers and things like that. Like those are the people who are trying to actually reckon with the world as it is right now. This is done through like the conceit of like presenting the future and things like that. But that's more like someone like Philip K. Dick. Like you look at this 1960s. There's all these philosophers of the 1960s, and it's like, oh, you guys were all obsessed with these issues from like 20, 30 years before, whereas these fringe sci-fi writer was obsessed with the actual issues of the time as the future would come to understand them. So you have like Philip K. Dick talking about like simulation and the Matrix and things like this, and like cybernetics and like the creation and manipulation of like false realities and like having your consciousness upload controlled by these corporate entities and things like that. All of his things are much more about like the real issues that were happening in the 1960s than the philosophers of the 1960s. I think that's just true in general. So you can like you'll find more insight into the world in poetry than in philosophy. Philosophy can explain the insights of poets, but poets just provide their insights and they don't have to explain the process or methodology by which they came to them. They just present them.
Right. Interesting. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't McLuhan also reading Heidegger?
Oh yeah, I mean everyone like Heidegger is big, like, but not just Heidegger. You know what I mean? Like everyone, he was reading a bunch of different things. He said Heidegger was perfectly attuned for like the cybernetic age, which I think is pretty true. Like Heidegger, like without Heidegger, a lot of AI, early AI research and things like that are all determined by kind of like late Heidegger and like Wittgenstein sort of stuff. Like these are the problems that people face when the notion of like general AI is like put into question by these sorts of philosophers, because it comes down then to the question of language, right? Like it always comes down to the question of language. We're talking about large
Exactly.
language models, etc. um, how do we know, how do we make the AI know what is a true versus a false use of language? Like can an AI write a metaphor that is novel or new? I don't think so. I honestly don't think that like what we call like truly creative use of language is possible with AI.
No, I agree totally. And I think that's because Heidegger talks about Dasein as a being which is concerned with its own being, right? And I don't think that's possible with AI or like any machine. And I was
No,
also
of course not.
right, exactly, yeah. And I was also wondering, right, like late Heidegger. I'm not sure if you like how familiar you're with him, but right, he
Pretty
talks
familiar.
about.
My wife was a like Heidegger Wittgenstein scholar sort of thing, so
Oh,
I
nice.
was more interested in that maybe almost like 10 years ago now. But yeah, I read a lot of that stuff a long time ago.
Oh, amazing. Yeah, because you sound like you know a lot about late Heidegger because right, like Heidegger talks about the poet, and the poet
Yeah,
is the kind of person which in each epoch of being kind of listens to the whisperings of the divinities, right? Like he listens to the unthought thought and brings it forth in his poetry,
yeah,
which the philosopher can't really do. And I was kind of connecting that to, like, for example, I think Jesus Christ is one of such persons, one of
of course.
Heideggerian poets,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, absolutely. Because like, what does he do? Does he provide any philosophical disputation, any analytical argument whatsoever at any point in his ministry ever? No. What does he do? He gives parables, mysteries. He himself is like a parable for the Pharisees that they can't solve. Yeah, I think Jesus was a poet. That's what was so, and like even like he was a techne, you know, like in the sense of a
Yeah.
tekton, in the sense of a carpenter, and that was the same word as the one for poet in Greek. So
Yeah. Well, Heidegger does distinguish those two, techne and poesis, and physis. He does
yeah, yeah,
distinguish those. But yeah, no, I agree that, yeah, I appreciate it.
yeah. I think if you want to follow that line of like Heideggerian, like this thing, it's a lot of the Germans at the same time are returning in the same way to Hamann, which is like the kind of common ground you'll find between Wittgenstein and Heidegger. Also, is that they go back to like the earlier days of German idealism, Kant, Hegel, etc. But really, Hamann is the first philosopher to like kind of do a meta critique of Enlightenment philosophy and return and say basically like poetry is the mother tongue of the human race. So you really just have to like go deeper into poetry, and that's what he did. He was like he called himself a Rosicrucian. I mean, I'm just trying to be like Hamann. I'm trying to do the same move. Like if I think there's any philosophical move to make, it's the same ones that Hamann does, which is just to create these kind of labyrinthine, very ironical and funny fragments that completely riddle the philosophers and just render them mute.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I've been noticing recently, right, like in modern kind of philosophical discourse, it feels like a lot of materialists become more spiritual, right? Kind of apply this poetical character to their writings, right? Like look at new materialisms, right? Like Graham Harman and like all of those folks, like object-oriented ontology, etc. It feels like there's like a kind of rebirth of kind of this ideal within the material philosophy, the kind of poet coming out of the materiality of like late metaphysics.
Yeah, I mean, there's like I'm talking about Joseph Needham, right? Who's like a pretty material, like he's like a materialist in the sense that he's just studying the material history of science and civilization in China, and just like the development of science, like on a material level, like where he takes all these alchemical texts and he goes, okay, yes, these are all written in this very like high poetical style with all these metaphors and things. But if we just look at this on the material level, like this thing describes this type of lead, this thing describes this type of like chemical solution, et cetera. He's a molecular biologist, but his own prose is extremely ornate and like poetical, and like he like does these flights of of reason or imagination where he's like, and this is we're going to go back to this Arab thing now, and then we're going to look at the Dead Sea Scrolls and these sort of Gnostical cosmologies. There's one that's still sticking in my head where he describes like the Gnostics as being like their fundamental metaphor for the like material, etc. This sort of purification where you have like a solution like oil and water where it's like you shake it all up and it's all mixed, but then through like time it sorts out so that like certain materials rise above the lower materials, etc. And that's like there's understanding of like the world. So it's like the pure souls would like in the shaking up of this of existence would find their way back to their proper station, which is floating above the water as the oil, etc. Things like that. So that all of these metaphors and worldviews are also like determined and determining in a sort of feedback loop the environment in which they're composed. So that's why naturally we use all like the sort of neo-Gnostics of today describe everything in terms of simulation and computers and like video games and things like that. We're like, oh yeah, this world is just like we're in a video game world, and it has, you know what I mean? Like that thought, that metaphor is only available because of the technology, but the technology is also only available because of an earlier form of that metaphor being applied.
Yeah, obviously there's this back and forth going on, but don't you think like Gnosticism kind of denies the divine hiddenness, right? Like most Gnostics I've talked to, at least, they kind of try to like almost like the Byzantine scholastics, right? Like they try to rationalize God and try almost like going back to new Platonism, right? Like they want to have this hymnology, right? Like this complete reunification with God. Whereas, for example, a lot of like non-heterodox Christianity really emphasizes theosis, right? Like the reunification with God, but still you're still present within your own body, right? Like you're still the individual person. And I've been noticing a lot of like Deleuzians online, which kind of fall into this spectrum as well, right? Like they try to kind of completely get rid of themselves and have this reunification with the one in this complete deterritorialization kind of way. And I think that's quite dangerous, actually, a dangerous notion.
Yeah, I mean, I was describing that as like the sort of like being fully subsumed by the sort of flows of information, etc. Like that's like the goon cave of being, where it's like, oh, I'm just like a fully cybernetic being. Like I am my internet avatar, and I will submerge myself entirely in the simulation or whatever. That seems to me to be where a lot of it goes. It's just like an embrace of the delusions of the present.
Right.
I agree that like a lot of Gnosticism comes from just being mystified by the technological environment that one finds oneself in, and sort of worshiping that as God. That's how I see it. It's a type of like a fetish materialism, like material fetishism, where like so today this takes the form of people being like the internet is God, or
Yeah,
like
yeah. I've heard that like quite a lot, actually. Like they talk about like the machine god or whatever. Like it's hilarious to me. It's so insane because like even Heidegger talks about this, right? Like being, like capital B being, is not a being, a lowercase being, and the same applies to God. And it feels like a lot of like those like accelerationists today kind of want to describe God as a lowercase b being, as like a machine or whatever, which they can like unify with it, right?
Yeah, what it really means, like God then is like in that case, like as the lowercase b being is really their bank account, or like you know what I mean, where it's like you it comes from this sort of like hyper rationalization of the state of the world, where the notion being that like what's this sort of like double predestination sort of thing that happens with like hyper Augustinian Calvinism, where it's like if you are right with God, then it's because you're being material rewarded like directly for that. So you're like then that means the more money that you make, basically the way things work now, the more you are correct in like the eyes of the God of nature or whatever, this lowercase b being that is determining your quality of life. So the economy in that way, the sort of just like network of things in that way, becomes their idol, this like golden calf or whatever. So like like you see if people go insane the more like success they have on the internet. I mean I've seen it happen all the time, because it's like this notion where it's like, oh, like this thing I'm doing is like rewarding me directly, therefore it's good. And it's like Mr. Beast, right? Like he's like, how could anything I'm doing be morally questionable in any way? I'm giving money away to people and I'm making a ton of money doing it. So what's wrong with that? And it's just like like if you have this notion of like a just world where the world is sort of like or the economy, however you want to put it, whatever the governance of the world, the archons, the basileus, that this thing rewards those who are worthy, and that there's a type of justice here in the world, then that's naturally the conclusion you come to. I'm of the opinion that there is no justice in the world. There's justice in the next world, in the one after us. So it's like all of the criminals that are running around today are going to get away with it, and they're going to be considered the great man of history, et cetera, in our moment. But in a century, they'll be completely known for what they actually were.
Hmm. So would you consider like out the world after our world, would it be considered like a non-materialist kind of theosis with God, or is it like new
I think
Jerusalem?
theosis is the New Jerusalem, in the sense that we become the sons of God, in the sense that like we all recognize ourselves as the supreme being, is humanity. Humanity itself is taken to be its own God, like in the sense that there's no temples in the New Jerusalem, because everything everyone's doing is taken with this type of like religious notion that like you're participating in creation at all times, and it's just like if this is done in a spirit of like human fraternity at the highest level, then that literally is the rule of God on earth. So that I think that's what theosis really is like the perfection of human governance.
Hmm. But not like in a Übermensch kind of way, right?
No, 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 because it's like, yeah, that's precisely where it goes wrong, where it's this
Yeah.
notion that in order for man to be like the son of God, it's because no one else is, right? Like there's only one, and you can sort of see how this sort of Christian doctrine, pseudo-Christian, anti-Christian doctrine leads directly to like Nietzsche's Antichrist, where he's just like, well, I want to be like Jesus, but the thing that's unique about Jesus is the fact that he was better than everyone else, you
Hmm.
know? In this type in whatever way you want to conceive of that. So so that means that like that's not even like a god though. That's like a demigod, where it's like you're the
Right.
Superman, like a
Right.
superhero. So that means it's not that you're one, that the many and the one are the same thing, which would be what I'm saying, where it's like we're all sons of God. The many and the one are the same thing. This is like the type of Western oligarchical conception of the few, where the few come to represent like all that is good and holy, where the one is questionable, etc., and the many are questionable. But to distinguish yourself from the many is to be a superhuman. So this is like the type of elitism you find amongst the Nietzscheans, where they're like, well, I'm not like those people, and it's not like they're alone. They're just in. They just consider their little in group the few. They're like, oh, like this is the elect here. We're the few above the many, and we oppose the one who's trying to work in the favor of the many. And this is how our entire system was designed for thousands of years at this point, which is the elevation of the few over and above both the one and the many. So we have this kind of opposition to unitary executive authority, because like in the sense of like oriental despotism in the way that like the Chinese system worked, or like a lot of these larger land-based empires worked, where the whole point of having a unitary executive authority was to keep the few in check, in the sense that if there were like these super large, there were these larger landlords than other these like peasant communes, they'd keep them in check so that they couldn't completely eat out the many and lord over them. There was only one emperor, and so like there's like the story of like the tall poppies, right, where they cut the tall ones so that they remain at the same level. This is taken by a lot of Westerners to be like this anti-individualist, like horrific thing. But what it really means is like having one, like the tallest poppy would be the guy who's cutting the poppies. So it's like you have the one who can make level the few with the many, so that you have just the one and the many, as opposed to this type of middle class of the few who are elevated above the many but below the one. That's our thing. Like we have this obsession with the middle class, which is this obsession with the few. Like we're not interested in, like, you don't see politicians even in the West talking about the poor or the many. They talk about the middle class, and like the hardworking middle class, like the middle of the pack here. They're not interested in the many at all.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Amazing. Yeah, maybe last question. How do you think we can reach New Jerusalem? Because I've talked to Haas before, and I've tried to kind of explain to him like late Heidegger, and because that's my criticism of like dialectical materialism, right? Like I believe in late Heidegger in the sense that I think there are like poets in each epoch that received the divinities and therefore like posit a new understanding of being rather than for me it's not purely material, the process of history. So how do you think
I
can
would
we reach like New
I
Jerusalem?
would quote I think we're, well, number one, I think we're going to get there no matter what happens. I think it's inevitable. So in my mind, it's like
Hmm.
I'm just speculating as to one of the roads or routes that are to the same inevitable end. I don't think like whatever happens, it's all going to the same place anyway. That's what's so beautiful about this type of understanding, where it's like, yeah, you can listen to me now or not. It doesn't matter because it's going to get there anyway. It might take longer. You could do it faster. You could do it the easy way or the hard way, but we're going to get there either way. I think we're probably going to go the hard way. So, but but I would quote Joseph Needham, where he was saying that like basically what we're in an inevitable development of what will be like a global commonwealth, in the sense that we already have a global economy. This notion that like we're gonna like return to like 19th century, 18th century, 17th century, etc. Eliminate these sort of global communications networks, and just the fucking global supply chain we have is absurd. I don't think we're going to ever retreat from that. I think that'll only develop more. So it's really like what type of ethos or what type of worldview could even govern the entire world. And he points to Confucianism, Taoism, revolutionary Christianity, and Marxism. And that's pretty much exactly what I think too. I think all of those things are, which is really kind of just like this view of like the merger of the East and West. That's how I see things happening, where you'll have it'll be like multicultural in the sense that it's just that there's going to be like a consciousness that is capable of putting all like telling a story about the development of world history up until its inevitable end. I think the only thing that has really tried to do that, it's not Taoism or Confucianism, it's revolutionary Christianity and Marxism, are the two discourses like genres of poetry, maybe you even want to say, that are seeking to describe a transcendental world history that incorporates literally everyone and every single thing. The Taoists and the Confucians never even tried to do that because they took that's not a it's not a task they considered worth doing in any way. Like they were more interested in seeing, like, just describing the organic processes of nature, of like human organization. They're like, that's why they have an emphasis on non-action as being like one of the best types of positive action. Whereas which you also see in Christianity, I guess Jesus says that himself. But I think that it's going to be a merger of those things, and that's sort of like what I try to do, is to describe how everything sort of fits into the Christian worldview, the revolutionary Christian worldview, and the production of this New Jerusalem. I think that there's just infinite evidence for it if you look for it. It's just really more about how do you
Hmm.
give people the eyes to see that, like what in what way should you be reading the world in order to see this? And that's difficult. That's more difficult because I think it's more that people have been convinced in one way or the other to look at the world not in that way, as opposed to like, whereas it seems kind of like self-evident to me anyway. But that's only because I've already lived through inhabiting the worldview of like of various different worldviews. Like for like, you know, if you believe that where humanity is going to die out pretty soon, and we're just going to be replaced by machines, et cetera, et cetera. This type of worldview, I don't like. Then you know you're like damned. Like I don't know, how do you speak to idolaters? That's really the thing. It's like you got to smash people's idols, and then it's like really this is what you see with the absence of idols. Is like if you're just like reading, for instance, like I try to read the Bible without any of the preconceptions of the institutional mediations of this, or like the philosophical explanations of the scripture. I just try to
Yeah.
assume that the scripture is more correct than anyone has interpreted it to be and always will be. So I'm like, okay, what does this mean now? And like you can look at how like let's say the book of Revelation has been read many different ways over many different years, and obviously there's been a perpetual cycle of people being like, this is the end of times, like we're finally here, this is like the point where we're at in the historical cycle, we're like this, and this is, and so that means that this figure is in world history right now as the Antichrist, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. In the current moment, you see people doing that, but with identifying things like, you know, the Bank of International Settlements or these sorts of things as being like the Antichrist. And I think that's the correct way to look at it. Like, and they say, oh, look, this thing is like a continuity with the Roman Empire, and it goes all the way back to there, and it goes, yeah, it's always been true. Like the scripture somehow, this metaphor of what it's like to like live under imperial dominance has been true the entire time, which I think is
Hmm.
cool. Marx, I think, is
Yeah.
like an extension of that, though, because I really like people try to like the people who worship like the institutional form of Christianity in some way, where they're really just like fandoms for particular organizational practices. Like if you're a Catholic, you're like just a fan of like ceremony or whatever, or you just happen to be born into it. I don't fucking know. But
Hmm.
Marx and Engels were looking at it from like an anthropological perspective, in the sense of they were like, what did this mean to the people at the time, like the earliest Christians? Like, why would this have this appeal, etc.? Like, what was he actually talking about? What was Jesus really doing? And they're looking at it from this like economical perspective of like the temple economy and like debt
Yeah,
forgiveness,
like
etc.
LaRouche and stuff like that.
Yeah, so it's like, what's more real? Like, like, is it this the the Antichrist of the institutional churches, or like the man who was actually involved in like, you know, the center of a massive global trade network, which is like where is what Israel has always been, being like this, where Asia, Europe, and Africa sort of come together. That it seems obvious to me like that, like this type of transcendental like world consciousness would develop right there at that time, where that's like in that same time you have like the first contacts of the Roman Empire with like the Chinese and things like that. Like it's the beginning of the modern age. Like that's why I think Jesus is such a central figure, is because he like kind of saw where all of this was going.
Yeah, well, obviously, I appreciate the institution of the church. Like, I'm somewhat Orthodox, right? Like, obviously, I'm still gonna attend church and trust the church fathers. But no, it was really interesting talking to you. I appreciate it. I have a
Yeah,
lot more to say actually, but I want to let other people speak as
for
well.
sure.
So,
I mean, I have nothing wrong with
so
like going to church and things like that. Like, I don't really like if that's good. If that like I've done it myself. Like, it's just more that I don't think that the whole meaning of it can be reduced to that, where it's like, oh,
yeah,
like
no, totally,
that's
yeah,
what it means. Is if you do that, then you've discovered like all that there is to it. Yeah. All right.
yeah. Well, man,
Nice talking to you,
super
man.
interesting. Thanks for having me,
For
man.
sure. Peace,
God
man.
bless, man.
God bless. All right. Golad's back. Hey, what's up? Yeah, what's up, man?
Fascinating conversation as usual. I just was, especially on the topic of theosis, I was like vibing out of my chair because, like, doesn't Joseph Needham, in some sense, like exhibit theosis in that his spirit is properly oriented in unifying the opposites of like materialism, like science, and like the spirit, a theoretical Christian,
Yeah,
and like
sounds like
how common is similar. I mean, I haven't read these people, but if I'm just taking your word, right? Like, I would love to read Hamann based on what you said, but if he's like a philosopher working in like logic and fact or whatever, point
well, it's like
towards
think
poetry,
about this.
like
Like you would say, I would say that like the point of theosis, like you look at like Jesus, right, as the obvious example of this, where like God and divinity and man sort of touch. That's like already the reconciliation of like the greatest opposites. You have like absolute infinitude and like a complete lack of determination in something like God,
of
and then you
course
have like the
he is the
definition of limit.
he's the version of that. Of course, he's the line
Yeah,
that connects the center God to the invisible center to the circle, right?
yeah.
He's the
So that's a reconciliation of opposites or dialectical tensions, you can even say. And I think that like the more you try to do that, the more you inhabit that position of theosis. So it's like it's like there's a lot of paradoxes to that. Obviously, it's sort of like one
there's
of the
traps
like
too, like you were saying, like if you get too in your head about being the ubermensch, like that's sorry, you've chosen incorrectly.
well
You've forgotten
exactly
the
what I was about
chalice,
to
right?
say.
Like
I was
you
about to
forgot that
say
the
like
chalice is wood, like
so like for instance, someone who's like a true reconciliation of opposites, like you would call that sort of like a saint or something. But a
right,
saint is someone who would not recognize themselves in any way distinct
of
from
course,
anyone else. They'd say,
Paul.
I'm a sinner. Whereas
Yeah,
someone who's like, well, I'm a saint, like they're actually in that way not reconciling these opposites. So that's like why like the Ubermensch could never be the Nietzschean Ubermensch. Like if you wanted to give someone like I think if you're looking at like 20th century leaders of that time, like who's closer to being the Ubermensch, FDR, Hitler, or Joseph Stalin or Mao? I
Stalin.
think it's more like like Mao. Mao to me, like he was like like he was reconciling all of these different oppositions, and he like made it his own personal mission to reconcile all of the oppositions in the largest empire in the world. Like that's like a massive task to take on, far more so than any of the other tasks that these leaders had. You could say Stalin is compares, but I would say even Mao's is more impressive. Um, so I think that that's like really where you see this sort of divination or whatever. And it's like, and like, what does Mao say? Mao's like, well, everyone can be me. like like that's why they even distributed the red book, etc., is because he wanted to arm all of the people with the way that he saw things, so that they could use that against the few, i.e., like the sort of bureaucratic middle layer of Chinese society. Like he was going straight to the masses, like the one and the many. There, like representative, right there. Like the many being represented by the one. That's Maoism.
That's Ron Paulism, right?
Yeah, Ron Paul Maoism. But it's the same thing with Jesus, where it's like Jesus doesn't say really. He doesn't say that he's in any way distinct from anyone else. Other people say that about
They're
him, and
just
that's one of the interesting things about the Gospels, that he's always saying like, "Well, what do you say that I am?"
well,
Like he doesn't say that much stuff about
even
himself.
the apostles are the same way, and they're of course like for the same reasons, right? That's why they're chosen. That's why they're saints. You know, like it. Yeah, it's very interesting.
Yeah, but then there's like also like there's always like more tensions because it's like, well, even Judas was chosen, right?
Of course,
So it's
of
like,
course, yeah. No, you
so,
don't get to always understand the full, like you'll never fully understand like all of being. Like that's like capital B being is reserved for God. That's part of the strangeness of God, right? Like I think that was kind of brought up earlier too, but I did want to go back a
yeah.
little bit to like lowercase God because we were talking, or you and someone else were talking about machine God and like building gods out of AI, and it's like those are building those gods is like they're just building bodies for like something to inhabit, right? Like I mean, it's necessarily outside the realm of the spirit, but the spirit realm is above, so it's like it has wings, it has sight on these things. And
Well,
like
it's sort of like it's literally like the myth of Narcissus or like Pygmalion, where it's like, okay, you've made this machine that can talk to you and responds to you, and it's like you know that you've made this machine and that it's just a machine and that you made it, but if you can convince yourself or delude yourself into thinking that this thing is somehow autonomous or like has a spirit or something,
that's
and it's speaking to you, like, and now it's not like it's like this type of a forgetting. It's like, no, you made this.
no,
It's sort of like
it's like a rebirth of their own slavery to the material, like the fact, like it's reproducing their slavery, like it's reproducing a god in the world of their own choosing slavery. Does that make
it's
sense?
just an idol.
Yeah, it's an idol they're building
It's an
for sure,
idol,
for
yeah.
sure, for sure. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I try to deal with this in my novel because it's sort of like the idea of like someone like drawing pornography for themselves. You know what I mean? And then it's like you know that you just made that. Like it's all in your head. Like you just made this thing. It's not outside of you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that's the type of like fetishization where like you're kind of willfully restricting yourself from recognizing the self-evident truth of things in order to kind of voluntarily enslave yourself to an idol because it is like there is a lot of reasons to become an idolater. Like you take a lot of responsibility off of your own shoulders if you're like, hey, listen, I just do what the idol tells me to do. Okay, I'm just an employee here. I'm just following orders.
At the risk of like sounding like a Gnostic, that's like the slide of the demiurge. Like you're tricked into your own believing in your own god that you made up. Yeah, right. You're tricked into the slavery. Like that's crazy. I don't know. It's just like I don't know. I have a bunch of buddies. Like I don't know. I was in the Navy for a little while, and I have a bunch of buddies that are like completely captured by government systems, and it's like providing them a good life, right? Like a better life than a lot of my other friends who are completely outside of it. It's just like so strange to like.
Yeah, they know what they have to lose.
Yeah,
so it's
of
like
course.
Let's say like you're like you like make it up the ranks in the Navy, and it's like they paid for your health care and your college, and like you got a house and you're married now or whatever, and you're like, listen, like I got nothing. I can't. I'm not gonna fucking. I'm not gonna fuck this up for myself. So you know, like you lose a lot by trying to maintain fidelity to the truth. Like you might lose everything.
Oh yeah. Well,
because
didn't he say it too? He came to bring not peace but a sword. You know, you're gonna estrange yourself from your parents, buddy. Like, like he told you right up front. Anyway.
Yeah, you're gonna lose everything. That's like you know, that's why he says it's harder for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven, et cetera, et cetera.
Because he already sold like, his sight to the material.
He's already owned.
Yeah. Damn, cuz
you can't worship God and mammon at the same time. So it's like, well, if you're worshiping mammon, like you really want to get God, well, you might lose everything.
Bro,
you know? Like,
it's wild. It's wild how people will like.
People have been dealing with this in a lot of ways, though. Like if you think about like how many people have lost friends, or like you know all these issues that have spawned from like 2020 or something, where it's like, oh, sorry, I don't worship the CDC, and it's like, it's like, well,
that's part of the beauty of these massive like crazy phenomena like COVID, where it's like. It's a complete redefinition period, like, and the faster you can see that, like, the more beneficial it is to you. But like on the subject of like I don't know, some of my best friends that I like are in the group chat or the boys chat or whatever, like they're on this like Bitcoin tip. They're like a lot of veterans are like on this Bitcoin tip and things and you know associated whatever coins.
Yeah, XRP.
Yeah, like all of it.
Blah, blah, blah.
And I'm just like. I know in my personal experience, like whenever I converted, which like of course you have the like catechumen zeal or whatever, like I'm definitely no better than that, but like just talking about it is like the joy with which people like fight it, like just the mention of it, it's really astounding. And like
Well,
it's like
it's sort of
compassion's
like
necessary because it
listen,
was
man.
me too. Like I remember those days, but like I don't know. It's just I just feel so
There,
lucky.
there's like all of that sort of stuff. It's like imagine being like during the. Did you ever? There's a really great documentary on the Beanie Babies bubble for Beanie Babies in like the late '90s, early
Right.
2000s when this was like when the first major sales of like these collectibles of like pop culture shit from the 20th century. You know, where it's like
That's
the first Superman comic is worth $12 million or whatever the
that's
fuck.
still the
So everyone
idols for
started
people
being
our
obsessed with
age.
this
Like
stuff.
that's still ensconced in
Yeah.
people's like, and like I remember it even
Well, the
then.
thing is like it's only possible because it actually does work to a degree. It's like if you're running like a multi-level marketing scheme and like you're in it early enough, you will
Of
make money.
course,
You know, you will make a lot of money. So it's sort of like so then people are just like on the lookout for these new things because it's like the real money is to be there first. Let's say Pokemon cards, right? If you bought up a bunch of first gen shadowless booster packs of Pokemon cards when they first came out in like 99 or whatever the fucking year it was. And you just held those for 30 years. They'd be the increase in value on those is more than on any other fucking Pokemon card that was printed ever since then. Right? The
Magic the
first
Gathering
set is the
stocks.
one
You
that,
know, like I'm familiar
yes,
with this sort of template.
yeah, but it's the same thing with all of these cryptocurrencies because it's like the only way to really make money is to be there before everyone else.
Well,
So it does have this multi-layer marketing campaign type of thing where it's like it's not enough for you to just be in. Like you need to convince other people to be in after
and
you because that's where all of the profit
it's really
comes from.
pernicious because like the more attention is given to things like this, the more it reproduces itself to the point we're speculating on like where we live and raise our families. Like I live in Florida, so it's probably more in my face than if I were to live somewhere else. But like land speculation is crazy, and like watching, you know, it's like a game among people who like you know, quote unquote own houses in America to like
Yeah, they're
track the
like the houses
number.
that become Pokemon
Yeah,
cards.
track the number while it goes up, and then no one can buy a house anymore, and all housing gets consolidated by like fucking not hedge funds, index funds and other good stuff.
Yeah, I mean,
Incredible.
you know, anytime that I happen to get on crypto Twitter, like through the For You page or whatever, it's always the most psychotic shit. Like, I'm kind of glad I'm a little insulated from it because every time I have to deal with it in the real world, like, it's always like awkward as fuck when I'm talking to like Bitcoin people or whatever, and I'm like, yeah, listen, I knew about Bitcoin back in 2011. Here's why it's all fake. Or whatever, and they'll be like, "What?" Like they just assume that like if you are critical of it, it's because you don't know anything about it.
Yeah.
You know, you're not part of the elect. You haven't been initiated into the mysteries of fucking XRP and the blockchain or whatever.
Satoshi's white
Even though
papers
they're
and
ironically, yeah,
whatnot.
exactly. Even though ironically, they're like the latest people to the fucking game. And I'm like, listen, like I could have bought Bitcoin when it was $1. Okay, so I'm like, so I know what I'm talking about on this stuff. But I see people like on that space, like they're just kind of naive. Like they can't really see any of the negative consequences of things because like it would cost them too much in the sense of they've already invested in this to see that. So they're like, yeah, I think AI landlords would be good. Like it would be better than human landlords, probably more responsive, and it would be more competitive. So it'd be lower prices or whatever. It's like, okay, all right, dude. Like I don't know, how do you sway people who are fully
Does
invested
this like
on this? Like you're basically telling them that they should give away all of their
is
money.
that naivete like produced by the system in order to like make replication easier? Like if you're focused on these little micro economy bubble games, like you're no longer like doing shit, being productive on like
Well, you're not
land
paying
that you're
attention to the real
owning.
economy.
Yeah, interesting.
You're not paying attention to the real economy. Like, so you got all these people, like, I know people like this where they're like, you know, they make decent money, et cetera. And they're like, yeah, I realize that, like, you know, they can't really get into Wall Street, right? Because it's like, well, that game's already been solved, right? Like, you can't make the super profits on investment the
Well,
way
there's
that
probably
crypto has.
too
So you
many
can't beat the
peepholes in it.
market.
You know, like it doesn't have the structure's not the same. Parts of it have collapsed because there's been too many cuts inside of it. You know, it's been hollowed out, so to
Well, it's
speak.
just like you're competing, like like, you know, you can't be like like you're not going to be making a fortune. It's sort of like playing poker, where it's like you have to be really good at poker to make a living
But you
playing
can just
poker, right?
bet the
And the
spread
only
on
way to make a
roulette
living,
instead, you know, like
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, and the only way to make money playing poker is what you're really doing is you're sitting between the house and the worst players, and you're taxing the amount that the house would tax on these players who are just losing all their
Right.
money. Anyway, like you're not actually making things; you're just standing in between
Yeah. Oh yeah,
someone
back
who's
to the
throwing away their
proletariat
money and the
discourse. Like,
house.
what's a proletarian? Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so it's exactly the
Yeah,
same thing. So you have these people like, yeah.
nice. Hey man, I just want to,
Well,
salute to Dad Gang. Love what you do. Love talking
Dad
to
gang
you.
out,
You
man.
know, man, we really appreciate you down here. Peace.
All right, peace, man. Yeah, I'll go off on that a little bit, I guess. If you're obsessed with playing the crypto markets, you're not really paying attention to the global economy because you're like, that shit doesn't matter. I've already seen the future and I'm going to inherit it when it's all running on the blockchain or whatever. And it's like, okay, what about like these central bank digital currencies? They can't really even like it was a great move to get all of these sort of like ANCAP, like libertarian types to build the infrastructure for something that they would consider to be like totalitarian communism, even though what it really is a type of like financialized socialism for the bourgeois. Like it's actually a pretty brilliant gambit if you think about it. You get all, especially like all the dissidents, et cetera. You have all these people who are like, "Oh, I'm not invested in the maintenance of this system anymore," and then they're like, I'm gonna put all my money into Bitcoin," and then their Bitcoin takes off, and they're like, "Oh, like I'm kind of invested in this now," and they become kind of conservative in a weird way, where like it was a great way of capturing all that like revolutionary energy, and that's really what a lot of our system is predicated on is taking and recruiting the most intelligent of the dissidents in order to give them a job in the deep state, right? Like if you're like a really, if you organize, let's say, an effective communist party in America, the CIA is going to contact you and they'll be like, hey, why don't you just work for us? Obviously, why wouldn't they? That's like who they want to recruit. They want to recruit people who are capable of like posing a threat. Like, why would you go to war with these people when you could just recruit them? You go, well, if you don't, if we like, if you can either come with us or we'll take someone else. So same thing. Like, let's say you're a Twitch streamer, like fucking Vouch or whatever. It's like even if it's not like you're consciously having people roll up to you to give you these offers or whatever, you sort of if your mind's adapted to the market. And you just see like your own metrics. You're like, oh, when I go more towards the center, I retain my views, et cetera. Like when I take this position, it's popular amongst the chat. Like it's this type of honing for instrumentality to the market. It's that it doesn't have to be done consciously. It's much better if it's unconscious. But anyway, I just think how that funny it is that like these Bitcoin people are now like they present themselves as like hyper revolutionary radicals, but at the end of the day, they're like, hey, don't touch my speculative investments. I want to live off of rent. I want to just be digital landlords, like all the people who have money and there was a good YouTube documentary about what is it, Cryptoland, one of those like metaverse projects, which is just like complete garbage. And it's like I think it's called "The Future is a Dead Mall" is the name of the video. I highly recommend it. It's called "The Future is a Dead Mall" because it's like it's you sort of just see like it's like this space where like it just exists as an advertisement for itself. It's like this is a real estate that you could buy, and it's like, okay, but why would I buy this? There's nothing to do here. And it's like, yeah, well, it's under development. You'll see when the train comes in, or like, we'll see when everyone's on here, then it'll be worth something. So then if you buy into it, your job is to then promote the idea that everyone's going to buy into it or be forced to buy into it. The multi-level marketing campaign type of thing. It's how fascism works. Like you have to be a recruiter, like on the local level. Your ability to get more people into the collective fantasy is how you ascend in rank within it. Anyway, Will, you're on. You can talk.
Oh, sorry about that. I was breaking up a little bit.
No
So
worries.
yeah. So like, this is going. I say this with like a little bit of caution because it might sound trolly. I promise it's not. But I'm like genuinely curious, kind of going off of the back of like the previous discussion regarding tech. I've recently started getting into Ganon, and it sounds like this is kind of an area that you're interested in. I know,
Yeah, the deist god of rationalism.
well, so I'm like, so I started reading, I started reading both of these things as I was getting into like techno pessimism, and like everybody was telling me like, and this is the part where I promise this isn't a trolley thing, but like reading, but like the Ganon perspective versus the Evola perspective when it comes to confrontation, like confrontations of modernity, and like, does one lean in? Does one ride the tiger? Or do you kind of like back the fuck off, or like try to find some alternate route, but which is like more the Ganon perspective. And this is almost like less about like the content of the writing, more than and about like the way in which these men lived. And I'm just
Well, you're really looking for a lifestyle, is what you're saying, right?
yeah,
Like you're like, well, my current lifestyle isn't satisfying, so what should I LARP as in order to become that thing?
right,
And then when I LARP as that thing, I'll get that thing in the end. Well, it's like, okay, well, what do you want? What are you looking for, pal?
right, exactly. Well, and that's the thing is like, do you like at the end of the, I'm sure this is something that you've thought about, is like, do you think that these men like at the end of their lives felt like more or less kind of satisfied with their relative directions, right? Like,
I don't know.
you know,
Who cares?
you don't think that
That's a
it's
better
an,
question. It's like, why does it matter?
well, I guess,
What is the point of you being satisfied? Like, is anyone satisfied? Who the fuck is satisfied? I don't like. Tim Dillon did this bit, which I thought was pretty funny, where
sure,
he goes, the rich people aren't even that happy. So why are we trying to make everyone rich? It doesn't even seem like we can figure out how people who are rich can be happy. They're all fucking miserable too. So it's like, who is really satisfied in this? Like, Bill Gates, right? He's got. If I had that much money, would I be spending my time at the CDC and the WHO? Hell no. I would be fucking chilling. So it's like, who's really satisfied?
right. Well, I guess like
And like,
the
what does that look like?
right.
If you were really satisfied, would anyone even know? Would it be something? Would you be like explaining how satisfied you are to people, like writing books about how satisfying your lifestyle is, or is that not itself sort of like someone who would do such a thing? Isn't that like a representation of a lack of satisfaction? If Evola was so cool and so based, why did he have to tell everyone?
I guess I hadn't thought about it that from that way. But I guess like it's also it just like it's a way of framing this other question, which is, okay, is it like is it if one takes issue with the consistent degradation of the world around them in these specific ways, they had similar diagnoses. Um, does it make sense at all to try to resist it whatsoever? Or do you kind of like lean in and just like fucking enjoy yourself, you know?
Well, this is like basically the question where it's like, okay, we see if we're in a fallen world, right? We're in a fallen world where people worship Satan as God. So should you worship Satan and be rewarded, or should you be crucified?
Right. Well, I guess framing it
Yeah,
that
I don't
way is like
know.
a good
Do
way
you
to
want to
put it.
be a sheep or a goat? It depends on where you want to be sitting in the last judgment.
Mm-hmm. It's funny that you use the term sheep and goat here, given like the symbolism that's usually used for. I get your point, but but yeah, uh, the thing is, like, even then, like, the righteous path is like consistently obscured. Like you could go down this like very specific and almost like autistic path of learning like the original like Hebrew and Aramaic and all these languages and trying to understand like exactly what these ancient texts meant in terms of like following a righteous path. And you're probably still going to get it the fuck wrong. Maybe that's the point, is that it's about
Yeah.
intention. But
Well, it's really about your way of being in the first place. Like, are you so? What would be like Jesus is saying? Like, if you give away all your money, you join this community of goods and things like that, then you'll ultimately be more satisfied than the rich man. That's why the rich men are coming to him and saying, "Hey, like, I'm fucking miserable. Well, how should I do this sort of stuff?" And this is also why a lot of communists in like the communist revolutions, like in things like the USSR and in China, a lot of the aristocracy became class traders because they were like, hey, listen, like it's fucking not satisfying being an aristocrat in this decaying fucking empire, which is just getting fucked all the time. I'd much rather be a hero and get recognition from the people. That's like why, like the thing that like Evola and these people who are like obsessed with aristocratic virtues and things like that don't understand is that the origin of the aristocracy in the dawn in like prehistory in history itself, the origin of these aristocrats were people who were risking themselves for the collective, for the many. So that's like how you became recognized in some way as being above.
Yeah, they were
was by putting
knights.
yourself on the line. Yes, and they sacrificed their own well-being for other people's well-being. Like, you know, they put themselves between, let's say, if you're defending from the people from an invasion, you're literally putting your life on the line and risking your life for the sake of others. Where if you die, you got nothing out of it, right? Nothing at all. So that's really what distinguishes. That's like the real aristocratic virtue, is not like sitting back and being judgmental on the rabble and being like, oh, I'm just born into this elite state. The real aristocracy, the true aristocracy, the spiritual aristocracy, are the people who fight on behalf of the people and sacrifice everything in their lives for them, and then in that way they become heroes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well,
That's why
and
someone like Donald Trump appeals to people.
right.
Why? Because he gave shit up. Like he says all the time, where he's like, "I had such a nice life. I don't have to do this." But he's putting himself on the line. Like he's probably going to go to jail, in order to get the recognition of the people.
Well, and it's interesting that you bring up the kind of origin of the aristocrat, right? Because like you would think then that like this current kind of interpretation of the aristocrat as like this almost like natural aristocrat, the knight, is
Yes.
like
Okay. So you're
necessarily
using the correct
controversial.
term. John Adams, I think, made a very good delineation between the natural aristocracy and what he called the artificial aristocracy. And he was pointing at the Chinese system as one in which virtue and the natural aristocracy rises through the ranks by means of merit. This is the whole goal, was to create a society like the Tang Dynasty in China. If you read the founders, they were obsessed with China, and they were obsessed with how, like, the political science, in the sense of how do you make it so that the most talented or most meritorious people are the ones who ascend in rank, as opposed to the British Empire, where you were born with your title, right? You were born into your class, you have a title, you inherit that title, and you just get that position by means of your birth. That's what they consider to be artificial, because it was based entirely off of these legal fictions like these titles in the first place. Whereas a natural aristocracy would be one that was open to anyone, and in which there was no inheritance, so there would be no political dynasties in that sense. Where, like, as in the Chinese system, if you're born and you ascend in rank in the mandarins, etc., in the Chinese court bureaucracy that existed, your children don't inherit a rank; they still have to start at the bottom.
Right.
So that
So
means
then
that
in this
only the
case,
natural
yeah.
aristocracy survives.
But like, wouldn't then, like, if you believe in heritability whatsoever, like you'd assume like it's not not total randomness, like a better
I don't believe
a
in
better
it
fit
in
than
that sense.
randomness.
I also, like, you know, if you want to talk about genetics, then you also have to talk about epigenetics, and that's become more and more important over time. So I don't, in all of this. So I don't think it's like, hey, well, you've got this rich guy and he has kids. That means that his kids are probably going to be just as confident. I mean, have you watched Succession? Have you read King Lear? All of these stories are about how a lot of the virtues of the natural aristocracy, or someone who, like, you know, let's say makes it from the bottom to the top, come from the fact that they went through that processing. Whereas then if you're born at the top, you don't go through that. You could call this inherited traits or acquired traits from struggle. If you don't have those, you're just born at the top, you'll never be able to actually get to that position on your own merits.
Mm-hmm. Right. So I guess then, then you could like idealize some like society that's almost like this puritan. You could imagine this like puritanical ideal of a society that's like geared towards identifying those natural members of the aristocracy, where
Yeah, like the
like
American
you.
Republic, the first two American republics before the Third Republic / Empire that we're in now. Yeah.
Well, wait. How would you characterize the difference between those? Because I would assume that like in those eras, you'd have like a greater kind of like matching of like generational wealth. Whereas for this, what you'd almost want is like a 100% estate tax, and then you let everybody kind of like compete on the merits from zero.
I just think, well, so in that time, you could always just go west, right? So
Right,
like so
right.
you have like these like I'm saying like the
Like the
third
new
one, if we're talking about like
frontiers.
Woodrow Wilson, et cetera, it's like where America has reached its limit continentally and now has to become like an international empire through like going to the Philippines and shit like that,
Hmm.
because there's nowhere else to go. That's like really why the most dynamic period of the American Republic was in its expansion, was because if you were born um, like lowly, you could just go to Kansas or somewhere in Middle America and start your own society from the beginning. And it would be incorporated in all of this. Like if you look at the Mormons, for instance, like this is a time in America where you could literally found a new society and be like the fucking god emperor of fucking Salt Lake City. You know what I mean? But
Hmm.
like
Right.
Joseph Smith was born like the son of like a con man, and he founded a nation. You know what I mean? Like that's what a natural aristocracy is where you have like there's a room or space for people to express these sorts of things. That doesn't exist in America anymore. We don't have the type of class movement that we used to have, because if you're born low here, there's no way to get to the top. It's fundamentally impossible to ascend in that way, because like in order for that to be possible, it has to also be just as possible for people who are born at the top to go to the bottom, which almost never happens now.
Right. Well, at least not the pure bottom. Like there could be some other form of it, which seems like basically if you
No,
change
no,
the
because
if you change the
the way things work now is that the wealth is autonomous even from the people. So it's like you look at, like, let's say that you're like the seventh generation Rockefeller. You don't even have control over your own inheritance because it's being managed by a trust. You just provided an income from that, but it's accrued so much interest that payment that you're getting paid out from the interest of this trust, which is managed not by you, but is managed by a board that's put together by like a fucking familial corporation or whatever. It's not even one individual's inheritance. It's not even a one individual family's inheritance. It's like a machine, which just produces a permanent aristocracy of wealth.
Mhm. Well, that I mean, there's that component of it, but then you're assuming that like the only vector on which like aristocracy could be proven in this almost like Max Weber proving wealth to oneself as virtue kind of way would be would be like financial capital versus, for instance, I would say like you could say that like terrain on which men prove their stature now could be technology itself. It's no longer land. It's like, okay, who is actually like conquering the greatest domain within this new like technical area, and you could denigrate those as being like full, like it's snake oil that they're like who's capturing the
Well,
most
okay,
snake
so you could
oil, but
compare. You
still,
could compare. Let's compare two figures. Then you could say like Elon Musk sort of represents that, right? Where like people
right,
are like,
right.
oh wow, he's like he's like on the cutting edge of tech and he's doing stuff for all of humanity. I actually had to hear my one of my in-laws talking my ear off about how Elon Musk is doing so much for humanity, et cetera, and like how it's so impressive and how he works all the time and he's working for the interests of humanity or whatever. It's like, okay, but does Elon Musk got shooters? Does Elon Musk got shooters like the way Trump does? I don't think so.
Shooters? What do you mean?
Like people who would die for him, people who would go to
Oh, I
jail
see.
for him.
Right, right. No, definitely not. No, there's none of
No,
that. And
like
like
not at
and
all.
that's a good way to prove it, because like there's all these people who are kind of like a techno optimists and like accelerationists who are kind of like saying like, well, if you wanted to like engage in like this Western Faustian spirit, like in the Spenglerian sense, you'd be doing it in technology. Like you're not conquering the West. You're conquering like you're not conquering like the Western United States anymore.
See,
You're not
like
conquering terrain.
you're thinking about this more in like the Nietzschean sense of like aristocracy, but I'm thinking
Right.
of it more in the sense of like the Republican sense of aristocracy or like civic virtue. So you could look at someone like RFK, right? RFK is like sort of doing it. He's attempting the same sort of thing right now, where he's putting himself on the line, right?
Mhm.
He's borne a lot of this stuff, and a lot of blowback for what he does, and he's proving his like kind of like he also has a sort of inherited aristocracy insofar as like the Kennedys are kind of like a royal family in America, or like a
Right. Like he never
family of
has to
nobility.
work.
No, but he has chosen to, and he's done that for the recognition of the people. Like that's what he's looking for. It's not like you could give him an amount of money to get him to stop because that's not what he's trying to be satisfied by. He's trying to be satisfied by living up to the sort of like legendary status of his father and his uncle and things like that. And that can only be done through self-sacrifice, and that's why he's doing what he's doing. He's not doing it to make money. Same thing with Trump. Trump didn't run for president to make money. Joe Biden runs for president to make money. Ron DeSantis runs for president to make money. The Clintons ran for president to make money. George Bush ran for president to make money. Donald Trump didn't make any money. He lost a lot of money.
Right.
RFK
Well, and now he's about to lose
like,
his freedom. But and
we'll
you can
see.
say the same thing for RFK. Well, yeah, he's losing some. He's already lost some degree of freedom, clearly. But like, at least in terms of like his like ability to publicly move without like facing the threat of legal repercussions, like that's new. Like even if he was like sued in New York City, like his life is like there's many measures on which his life is like unquestionably worse now than it was previously. But
Yeah, so that's really what the mark of an aristocrat is in the natural sense and the spiritual sense, I would say. And none of this like
right,
Evela, like, being an aristocrat means going to Switzerland and doing Dadaist art and then writing self-help books. I don't really think that's what the true natural aristocracy is doing. The natural aristocracy are putting their lives on the line for the people, for their recognition alone. That's all that would satisfy the natural aristocrat. Is not um, any amount of money or goods, but the recognition of the people. To walk down the street and have people go, "Oh, hey, you're that guy," like that type of thing, and not fame in the sense where it's like you're like a prostitute or something. Everyone's like, "Oh, look, hey, this is a person who's the way our celebrities are." But like, you can be a celebrity for being famous and like being like talented musician or whatever, or like an actor or whatever. But that's fundamentally different from being famous or like a celebrity for one's political engagement, right? In the sense of someone like RFK Jr. or a figure like that.
or
Those
like maybe like a
people,
Cody Powell or something, maybe.
I don't know who that is, but maybe.
It's like I think that's the name of the guy. I could be actually getting the name of the guy wrong. The guy who started that website where you could like download instructions for printing 3D guns, like
Oh,
all
Cody
these.
Wilson.
Yeah, Cody Wilson, like these guys who brilliant. They could absolutely have made it as like an engineer, earning in like the mid six figures, no question. And then they decided to embark on some project that they
Yeah,
ideologically aligned with. Yeah,
Cody specifically said he was trying to be like Lenin and by creating
right,
a historically meaningful thing from which would alter like the course of history, putting
right.
himself on the line for that. I mean, he ended up getting got for dumb shit, honestly, because he was fucking around with prostitutes, which is always how people go down. Never a good move, and
Sure.
people warned him about that very early on, but I don't know. So I guess he wasn't fully satisfied with his with his role in history. He had to because he got because he'd be bragging to these girls about it. It's kind of sad.
Well, I mean, him or like there's a million other figures like Albright, like the guy from Silk Road, or you could talk about like Andrew Torba, like all these people who like I'm not like intentionally bringing up right wing examples, although that's
I don't know.
kind of
I
like,
don't care about right wing or left wing, especially in America. I
but
tend to think that people who are described as on the right are actually like in a world historical view, like closer to the world historical left. Like I would say that the quote unquote radical right or like these sort of like rightist people in America are closer temperamentally to the Chinese communists, while the left here are actually closer temperamentally to Chinese liberals.
oh, in terms of just being like like members of like the pre-existing order versus like challengers of it. Um,
Well, it's also just like temperament. It's like a temperamental thing. Like you have people on the right where they're like, "Hey, we have like I care about constitutionality," and that's what people in the Chinese Communist Party would say who are defending the Chinese Communist Party. They're like, "Hey, we care about the Chinese Communist Constitution and the constitutionality of this and like the power of the party, etc." They're conserving their civic infrastructure and they want to like have it work for the people. They're not trying to destroy it in that sense. But it's weird here because in America, um, the right, they're like, hey, they recognize the prevailing state as being fundamentally unconstitutional or illegal. So they're saying
Right.
like we want to return to or reestablish the legitimacy of the republic,
Hmm.
which is what the communists do. Like that's the irony, right? Where it's like if you had Ron Paul and he actually wanted to do what he wanted to do and he could accomplish it, you would be creating communism. It's like, okay, you're gonna get in power and you're gonna fire all of these unconstitutional. You're gonna eliminate all of these unconstitutional authority bureaucracies, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, how are you gonna do that? Well, you need a whole party apparatus to do that, right? So it's like, okay, so you actually need a communist revolution in order to end the Fed.
So what is it about like this is another thing that's kind of like interesting to me is like I didn't realize that like I had a friend of mine who's like a big fan, I guess, who like said that you have like this very abstract kind of like definition of communism. Maybe abstract is like an insulting word. I don't mean it as such, but like
I mean
your
it. I think
definition of
mine's the most
communism is
concrete.
very different than others.
I think mine is the most concrete because what I think is that I believe in the Commonwealth in the sense that everyone is producing for the Commonwealth all the time. Like, for instance, right now, we're producing value for Twitter, right? We're not being
Hmm.
compensated for this. We're producing value or some sort of value for all of these people here. We're not being compensated for it. And I think that's fine. I think it's fine for people to freely do things. Like, I'm not putting intellectual property claims on my speech right here or whatever. I'm not going to sue anyone if they re-upload this to YouTube or some shit. You know what I'm saying? So that's what I believe communism is. Like, I think that if you're like creating these things, you should put them out for free. Ideally, everything would be free.
So it's not like a materialist kind of perspective on
No, it is. I think that
communism.
we're going to. No, I do think we're going to reach. We're going to create that society by necessity, and the only reason, like, we're more and more capable of doing so every single year, and I think it's just inevitable because, like, we have to invent all of these fictitious forms of value in order to just have people employed to do things that don't actually produce anything of value. Right now, that's like how our system works, is because we're just trying to continue the illusion of this sort of market running things when really things are truly governed by these international unelected boards of governance, like the Bank for International Settlements and things like that. So, like right now, for instance, think about COVID. Um, Most people, like we cut down on a lot of people working, and society still functioned.
Mhm. Right. Well,
So
I
you
mean,
could just
it
do that.
depends on how it is that you define function, right? Because you also had, didn't you have like simultaneous like also like this major boon in like what we're calling like deaths of despair? Like people felt like very purposeless. Like there's definitely like a class of people who I'm probably included in this who like need to receive some sort of like direct like need to have
Recognition.
some, well, not recognition, but some sort of like guidance in terms of like how it is to spend one's time and purpose.
See,
And
this
that's
is like,
not necessarily internally received always. Like that's often like most
well,
people
why are
need to
you
receive
here?
direction.
Why are you
Me
talking to
personally,
me? Yeah, why are you
I
talking to
enjoy
me?
it. I
Well, who
enjoy it.
told you to do
Like
that?
no, I'm saying not everybody feels this way. I think that many
Feels what
people don't
way?
really. I think many people don't really know how it is to spend their time.
Maybe they
And
haven't had the opportunity to, and so that's why they feel that way. But if they were given enough opportunity, they figure it out for themselves.
sure. Well, okay. So then, like, how would you explain then, like, the idle rich, right? Like these people
I don't
who
think they're
have
very
like
idle. They're
space.
constantly doing shit. They're constantly spending their time doing many things. I don't know, organizing charity galas or fucking blah 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 blah. They're constantly doing something,
Well, that's
ordering
that.
their health
These are
around.
people who are productive, but there's many people who are like
No, no,
definitely
no, 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 no,
inherited
no, no.
wealth
I'm
and
not
don't.
talking about. I'm not. No, 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 no. It's a lot of money. It's still a lot of. You still got to do stuff if you have a ton of inherited wealth. Let's say you inherited like billions of dollars and you don't have a job or whatever. It's like, okay, you have this estate. Well, you gotta manage all the labor there. If you're not gonna do that, like your lawnmower, the guy who's mowing your lawn, or your private chef, or the fucking cleaners or whatever. You're actually managing a whole little domestic economy there. And I guess you could hire someone to manage that for you, but then you're managing that person. So I don't know, what is it? Like what idle rich they have a whole economy underneath them.
Right? No, they certainly
They have a
like.
retinue.
Well, yeah, no. There's this like meta organism almost around them that's like governing these things, but they're not necessarily a part of it or offering any
Yeah,
sort of
they
like
are.
conscious decision. Well,
Yeah,
like
they
in
are.
the
They are
same
making
way that you
conscious
were
decisions all the
offering.
time. Okay, listen, I know people who have worked in the households of billionaires, like being
Sure.
hired as private contractors and things like that. So how does that work? Like they're they're employing people, right? So that means that they are working in some sense, in the sense that they're doing the work of employing people. Like
Right,
at
but
the
like
very,
in the like you know how
they're
you raise
deciding
that
what they do.
question.
They're like, hey, I want to. They, maybe it's not fucking stupid, you know. They do lots of stupid shit. They're like, yeah, I want to put in a walkway here. Okay, well, you know, someone's got to do that.
Right. Well,
They
but
don't
I
do
mean,
nothing.
you remember like earlier in the conversation, like you pointed out, like there's these people who like, they're not even they receive this inherited wealth. They're not even necessarily managing it themselves. Like other people are
They
making
still work
these.
though. Maybe they'll start a little literary magazine. Maybe they'll be like, hey, I'm really into Bitcoin. Like they're doing shit
Sure.
that other people do anyway.
Well, that's
Maybe they'll go
a
intern at
class
the New
of people.
Yorker.
No, but a lot of these people just end up as like alcoholics and like drug addicts and like and just bloat themselves to death. Like that's certainly like a
Maybe.
phenomenon of people.
Maybe. I don't know. I don't know what like which like I don't know any. I guess some of them do. Yeah, sure. I don't know. I think that's probably more for like psychological reasons or whatever. Probably like traumatic shit.
I mean, that's possible. The other thing, like, I mean, you could just like consider all the people who like win lotteries and then basically just end back up at zero because like, people
Yeah.
don't know how to spend their idle time and resources. And part of that is like, yes, lack of familiarity with what it is that they can do, maybe lack of confidence, lack of awareness. Like all those things are explanatory to
Or
some
that's
extent.
exactly what they wanted to do, is that they just wanted like you have someone who like lives paycheck to paycheck and doesn't really have any sort of things, and then they win the lottery, and so then they blow it all. So they kind of treat it like they're living paycheck to paycheck in the sense that
Sure.
they blow it all as soon as they get it.
Right.
I don't know, but maybe that's what they want to do. I mean, I read this story actually. This guy, he was a street, he swept streets, right? He was like a street
Mhm.
cleaner in the UK, and he won the lottery, and he blew all the money in 10 years. Then he went back to sweeping the street, and he said he was happier sweeping the street than he was when he had won all the money.
That he was happier? Really?
Yeah,
That's
yeah, because
surprising me.
because he had all this money, and all it did was like he'd go party and he'd get drunk and stuff, and then it just attracted all of these sort of parasitical people who were just like
Oh, sure.
lying to him and trying to manipulate him for his money. And then when he didn't have any of the money, he came to terms with his own alcoholism, and then he like went back to work and he like made real friends, and he was like, I'm actually doing better. I'm getting married, et cetera, et cetera. So
Right. But I guess like what I'm trying to say with these examples is that, like having this like almost like luxury communism where people don't have like necessarily even like an assigned purpose or driven
they
or
get to
top
build it
down
for
driven purpose.
themselves.
I don't
That's the
think that a
beautiful
lot, I
thing.
think it seems like there's a lot of people who aren't capable of doing that. And then they end up
According to
basically,
who?
well,
According to
just
you?
observation. You just like see these people basically
All right.
poison themselves, like the guy you're giving an
Okay.
example of,
Okay, but they're
like
free
the
to do
guy who
that.
was a street
They're free
sweeper.
to do that. They're free to do
Totally,
that. We're
but
not.
like, do
My
you think
job
that
is not
that
to
guy's
stop people
poisoned? By
from killing themselves.
no,
If they want to kill
no.
themselves, they can kill themselves.
Okay, but then then you're envisioning like a society that like in which those people are worse off, right? Like,
No, they'd be the exact same. I'm saying that on a base level, like okay, let's say we have this type of a fully automated luxury communism you're accusing me of. I'll just describe it
oh, I'm
to
not
you.
accusing you of it. I'm just saying, just in
People, no,
general.
I'm just saying. So people would just have they'd have a house, they'd have shelter, they'd have healthcare, they'd have food, they'd have the basic requirements for living. They wouldn't be living like having to work for money. So then they would only have to work for the sake of the work itself. Do you think anyone like does that? Like if you had an assured quality of life and it was like, hey, what do you want to do with your time? And it's like, I don't know. Okay, well, you got to figure it out. What do you want to do? You can try out a bunch of different things. You've got all the time in the world. You're born with nothing but free time.
Hmm.
So why?
And I think
So
a lot of
you can
people can
discover
thrive with
that.
that
You can, yeah. So I don't know. What's the problem then?
because there's a class of people who like don't struggle with that. There's a class of people who are actively, who are actively like poisoned by it, right? Like they don't
I don't
know
think
how to
that's
manage their
true.
own freedom.
No, I don't think that's true. I think that no, I don't think that's true at all. I think that those people are in the same position one way or the other. And in fact, if you give them all that free time, they like as the story I was telling you. Whereas this guy, he was an alcoholic and he was a street sweeper. Then he makes $1 million, fucking ruins his life, and then he's like, "Oh, I realized that like the things that were making me unhappy was like my alcoholism." So
Was
now
it
he's
the
making
alcoholism or was it like the fact that he was free to engage in alcoholism?
you can.
Like,
It doesn't cost that much to engage in alcoholism, my friend. I see
right,
homeless
but
people
like
doing it every day.
totally, but like that guy now had the resources to comfortably do it. right? But like
Yeah,
it
so that's
didn't
better
cost him
than
his
doing it
job.
uncomfortably, right?
Is it? Because it sounds like when he's like comfortably pursuing his alcoholism, he's able to descend into the depths that much further, right?
Yeah, but he did it really fast, and then he just fucking came to the conclusion, hit rock bottom, was like, oh shit, like even millions of dollars wouldn't make me happy if I'm still like this. So then he
Oh, okay.
changed.
I thought he ran out of money.
Yeah, he did.
Okay, well, so if you're running out of money, then he's better off without the resources than with them.
Well, okay, listen, man. I'm not looking at this from an individualistic perspective here. I'm saying
Sure.
society, everyone would be better off if no one was that destitute.
Well, so in that example, though, you have a person who's like productive and working versus a person who is like going out and being like an alcoholic, which carries like its own externalities, right? So he's like so you have a better society in which that street sweeper is a street sweeper than when he's a millionaire
I'm saying, have you ever
alcoholic.
heard of the experiments, like the kind of like rat utopia experiments, where they have like a
No.
bunch of rats all confined together and like with like fighting over resources, etc. And then they also have a little drip, a little thing that they can go over to and pump themselves full of like heroin or whatever. And so all these rats turn into heroin addicts and just die, right? But then they did the same experiment where they put it in an environment of like hyperabundance where there wasn't a struggle for resources, et cetera. And then there was this little heroin drip, and none of them became heroin addicts. Why? Like maybe it's because like the traumatic nature of living in this sort of society where you're surrounded by all this destitution, et cetera, where that you are more prone to these sort of toxic behaviors or whatever because
Oh.
you're in that whole society. But if you're in a society in which not everyone is fucking miserable, where everyone is given a certain quality of life, assured a certain quality of life, so that they don't have to fear for like the fucking bottom falling out all the time and going into homelessness or whatever. They're not subject to the grind. Then maybe that just leads to moral improvements for everyone in society on an individual level.
So just I've never heard of this study before. So in that study, like one of the groups of rats had both access to abundant resources and heroin, and in the situation where they had abundant resources, they didn't choose heroin at all.
Yeah, I mean, this is sort of like
That's
there's
bizarre.
less of a reason to do so. Like, why do you do heroin? You do heroin to a switch to like basically diet, like self medicate from the stress of life. Like people don't do heroin for no reason. Or, like people don't become alcoholics for no reason.
Right. Well, okay. So it's hard to imagine like a state of existence that is like like that is more comfortable than that of like the billionaire who still ends up than the billionaire like idle rich who still ends up as an alcoholic, right?
Well, I don't know. I'm saying
So
like,
then why
where
is
are
that
these
guy an
billionaire?
alcoholic?
Like, what I see amongst the billionaires is that they're all obsessed with like health and fitness and work all the time, even though it's not for profits necessarily. They consider themselves philanthropists, and they're doing it for like the recognition of people and like I don't know, for their own edification. I guess they're free to do whatever they want. Maybe there's some that are like alcoholics, etc., but that doesn't seem to be the norm.
Oh, certainly the guys that like became billionaires, like those are absolutely like very type A personalities. They spend their resources like very wisely. They're constantly doing self improvement. That's certainly like an existent type. I'm saying that like more often it's like the children of inherited wealth are much more likely to have this other type where they're alcoholics, and even though they have abundant resources, they totally just like kill themselves, either literally or over time.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe. I'm just saying, like that. Maybe that's also because they're alienated from both like normative society and from their own inherited position. In the sense of like, if your dad's a billionaire, and it's like, okay, well, what do I do? It's like, well, I can never reproduce that exact same feat because I haven't even been given the opportunity to like work my way up because I've been born into this position. So then what? Like, you can't just be a normal person, but then you also have all this pressure to do the exact same thing. It's like let's say your dad's a billionaire and you're like, maybe I just want to like work construction. Like everyone in your life would be like, no, and you'd be like, and then you couldn't even really go do that because you'd be there and they'd be like, oh, what are you doing here? You're a billionaire. So there's like, you know, It's kind of alienating, I imagine.
Right. Well, I guess then.
But I'm saying this would be a society where there aren't any billionaires, and there aren't any poor people.
Right. I guess then, like, how do those people end up spending their time?
However they want. How do you want to spend your time?
I don't know. I
If you had
remember,
all the
like,
free
during
time,
COVID.
if you never had to work ever
Yeah.
again, if you had free time,
Yeah.
you I don't know what your living condition is, but like I'm just gonna say you got this. You got a house. It's your house. You don't have to pay for it. No mortgage payment. You just got a house. You own it. No taxes. You don't have any of these fees. You know, you got food. You got all these things. You got all the things that you would want to go buy. You would just get for free. Let's say you had all that. What would you do with your time?
So I actually had this experience for like a year, 2 years, where I like didn't have to work, and basically I spent my time like just like reading computer science and linguistics papers and like engaging with like academics in that field. And,
Yeah, so you
like,
would do science
and
for free.
yeah,
For
so
the
yeah,
for the
yeah,
love
so
of science, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
But like,
So that'd be great.
but that thing is, other people had like, this is during COVID, and like during COVID, you had like a lot of other people who had access to like sufficient unemployment benefits to basically do the same thing, and there were a lot of these people who like were not nearly as productive and spent a lot of that time
Productive in
like
what way?
basically.
Like how do you know? Like maybe they were fucking making a garden in their backyard. I don't know. Maybe they were watching their nephews and nieces and doing other shit. Maybe who knows what they were doing? Maybe they were just bowling.
Sure. Well, this is where what I meant by pointing to like the increase in like deaths of despair during that period.
I think that probably has more to do with the fact of like the social isolation, less than the decline of working hours, and the fact that a lot of people lost a lot of like their friends and family for their various positions on these issues and things like that. And there's also just the prevent, like, let's say you were
No, it's
in
not a
debt,
perfect
so
example.
you're in debt and then you can't go to work. It's like, well, it's not that you're like free to not work; it's that you're just fucked. So,
Right.
like, let's say
Yeah.
you're gonna lose you need to work because you owe money to the bank for your house, so you have to pay these mortgage payments. If you go underwater in your mortgage payment, then you're gonna lose your house, and you also have to pay for your car. So then it's like, okay, now let's say this was a bartender or something during COVID, a bartender, 4 or 5 day a week night a week bartender who's scraping by is trying to pay off for his car and his rent and things like that, and then they can't work and they're not making the money that they're used to making in order to pay off their debts. So now it's like, okay, now I'm going to lose my car. And so they lose their car. And it's like, now that I've lost my car, I can't even get anywhere to get a job. Like, this is the real problem is that you're like, it's not like everyone was on vacation.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the debts remained. Like, if we had COVID policy where they're like, hey, listen, we're wiping all the debts. Like, no more mortgage payments, et cetera, and we're all going to stay home. Maybe there probably would have been a lot more compliance too, if that was the deal. But it wasn't the deal. So people were like, "Hey, I need to work because I have debts to pay." And then if you're not gonna let me pay off my debts, then I'm gonna go get fucked for life. So I might as well just kill myself.
Yeah. No, I guess. All right. So yeah, it's not exactly a perfect comparison. You're right. That's fair. Yeah, I just I'm very skeptical of like this whole like potentially like like pacified existence where
It's not
one does
pacified.
not.
This would be the unleashing of the ultimate competitive force of human potential. Because it would mean that everyone would choose by their elective affinities to invest their time and resources into the thing that they're most talented at, the thing they're most drawn to. And that means then things would be refined. So, for instance, you said that you're drawn to reading these computer science and linguistics papers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you would just become a scientist, right? You could go become a part of the community of people investigating these sorts of things. You can put out your papers and have discourse about this, and maybe this contributes to the production of future technologies and things like that. I don't know. I don't see a problem with that. I think that's good. I think if more people can have more free time to invest in themselves and develop themselves, I think that's good for everyone.
That's it. Has any like society like this been tried before? Would you say? Do you have any analogs?
I mean, the whole point is that we're heading towards this. That this is like something that we're building towards, but We've never even had like the technological capacity to do something like that yet. But I would say that if you want to look for like a comparison in the past, I would say that the future state of communism will be like a civilized form of what was called primitive communism, or like the Asiatic mode of production in Marx, which is where the way that the Chinese Empire worked in this Asiatic mode of production is that you had a king whose job was just to make sure that no one expropriated the various peasant communes. And in the peasant communes, they were organized in such a way that everyone in the commune had their own rice paddy and plot, and they would work on their own thing, and then they'd contribute to the collective thing, and like there's taxes all the way up. But it was literally just like communal organization. I could say the early American colonies, where let's say you were in the Massachusetts Bay Colony or the Plymouth Bay Colony. What your job is, like what you do all day, is govern the society that you live in. You are working on your own field. You go to the town hall. You discuss business. You make plans. You say, hey, what if we made a park here? And then you could devote your time to making a park, whatever. It would be up to you.
That's, but like, wouldn't you say that like this was basically like how is what happened in Soviet Russia, East Germany, yada yada yada, not an example of this?
I mean, it was an attempt, but they never claimed to have established the end state of communism. They said that they were self-consciously, if you read like Lenin, Stalin, etc., that they were creating a party apparatus to take the position of like what was being done by like industrial capitalists in the West or in America specifically, in order to like basically speed run through capitalism and develop their society like as swiftly as possible, so that they could then go beyond it. What happened is they caught up extremely fast with the leading powers of the time, like America, technologically, etc. Because you're comparing, right? Like, let's say we look at the turn of the century, like up until like 1917. You have America, which is beginning to electrify telegraph networks across the whole country, the largest railway networks in human history, and this massive expansion of production, and this massive creation of wealth. It was the most wealthy society in the world at the time. And so you had like Lenin said that the Soviet Union was basically the Americanification of Russia, which was this feudal power, which wasn't electrifying, wasn't capable of producing the sort of wealth that America produced. So they had this revolution, and they went, okay, we're going to do what America did as fast as possible. So obviously, there's a lot of
Growing
America didn't do
pains.
that for free either. We didn't industrialize and create all of these transcontinental rail networks without any casualties. There are a lot of people who lost everything in that pursuit. You had like these railroad executives, seizing people's land. You could say that's like collectivizing it. They're saying, "Oh, this is we're taking this land so that we can build the transcontinental railroad."
Got it. So basically, the idea was like to allow capitalism to develop all these automating technologies to eliminate the necessity of work, and just kind of like latch on to it without necessarily being responsible for the innovation of those technologies themselves, although they also participated.
I mean, they had Sputnik. I mean, the Soviet Union. It was the only part of the only reason why America has become the way that it is, like with this type of socialization and like these massive bureaucracies, et cetera, is because it had to compete with the Soviet Union. If we didn't do those things, then they would have gotten ahead of us. So it's like they were capable of putting a satellite into orbit because they had this massive bureaucratic scientific structure to put a ton of time and resources into that to direct people into doing that. So then we had to do that too. And so it's sort of like the Soviet Union fell apart from this massive bureaucracy, but we're like in the Soviet states of America right now. So we are also in this sort of bureaucratic bourgeois form of socialism, this sort of developmentalist state. But we haven't made the step from this type of socialism to what would be communism, which would be, as Jehu says, increasing free time. So what we should do is make a 3-day weekend, and then a 4-day weekend, and then a 5-day weekend, and then a 6-day weekend, and then a 7-day weekend.
But wouldn't you think that like competitive pressures would draw us to instead of like as we've automated work, we've also created more work for ourselves, right? Like we
Have
still
we?
have more things. Yeah, certainly. I mean, we still have like we have more resources than we ever have, but but we're just spending it on more things, right?
Okay, but there's also never been more of a surplus.
Sure, but like I mean, but what we're choosing to do is like spending that like we still have like 5 day work weeks, like even though we
Yeah.
don't need to work that much, right?
No, we don't.
Yeah, so wouldn't you think that that trend would continue? That like people would be
It
pushed
would if we don't do
to
anything about it. I mean, that's why I'm saying we should advocate for a 3-day weekend to begin with.
right. But I'm just saying that people would choose not to do that so that they could like earn more
No, we'd make it a
resources to buy
law.
more things.
We'd make it a
Oh,
law.
you're saying enforce it.
Yeah. That's how we got the 8-hour day.
Yeah, but people. So I'm at. Oh, okay, yeah. But like, I mean, we still have people who are like working jobs where like people are still breaking the law to work more than 8 hours a day.
Yeah, I think we should. That's bad. You know.
Right,
think we
bad
should-
for whom though? Like
Everyone.
bad for every. Oh, okay, but like, what if that worker then is able to like provide more resources?
Well,
for
I mean, that's why he's
themselves, right?
doing it, but I think that's ultimately bad for everyone. So I would make it so it'd be impossible to do that. So then, if that worker, as you're saying, in order to replicate their means of subsistence, that means that their employer would have to pay them more
Got
for
it.
the amount of work that they actually do, or they'd have to hire more people. I don't know. It's not my problem to figure that out. That's like the people who employ people's job to figure that out. I think that if you create a 3-day weekend, then like we have a lot of innovative people who can figure out how to make that work. I don't think that it's going to collapse society.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And then when we figure that out, we go, okay, well, we can do a 4-day weekend, then a 5-day weekend, then a 6-day weekend. And then eventually we'll have developed the means to have it so that all this shit's automated.
Mm-hmm. No, that's interesting. Yeah, I guess like the question becomes like, okay, how popular is that going to be to like
I don't know.
force
Ask
people?
anyone if they would like a legally mandated 3-day weekend. See how that goes. I think it's pretty popular. I think people would like that. And the fun thing about it is that once they have a taste of it, they never want to go back. If you there's already been pilot programs. I talked about this earlier on this space, but there's already pilot programs for the 4-day work week in Iceland and Ireland, and every single company that has adopted it as this experimental thing, they've seen productivity increase, and nobody has no one wants to go back. And they said, if you want to go back to the 5-day work week, you got to give me a raise of like a fifth of how much I make.
That's interesting. Yeah. So and productivity is increased in these.
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with these studies, but
Yeah.
I'd be surprised
Think about how
that
much
like
bullshit people do. Like, think about how little work is actually being done, and like how much of a con it is on both sides. Where it's like, oh, like I used to do this when I worked in an office. I'd be like, yeah, it actually took me 2 hours to do all of the work that I needed to do today. I came in early and did it as fast as possible, and I'm going to spend the rest of the day reading PDFs. And in fact, I'm going to stay late so I can collect overtime.
Mm-hmm. But like, okay, so it's funny that you say this because like, so I know a lot of like software engineers at FANG who they don't need to work very much to like sufficiently do their jobs, and they do take that time off. But you know what they fill it with is they fill it with doing other work.
Yeah, because they like doing the work. That's not even for the pay. Like, think of it like that's the difference between a lot of different types of labor. If you're like fucking doing manual labor and you're like chopping logs or something, you're gonna be like, okay, I chopped enough logs today, I'm pretty good. But if you're like a guy who likes designing fucking systems on a computer, you'd probably be doing that in your free time, even if you weren't paid for it. In fact, most of them do.
Right, but a lot of them do get paid for it.
Well, of course, but they don't get paid to do the thing. They get paid to be on call to do whatever is asked of them.
No. I'm saying that like in their side jobs that they don't need to do, they do get paid.
Yeah, maybe not necessarily though. Like a lot of there's myriad freeware products or things like that. People working on open source projects and things like that just for the sake thereof.
Mm-hmm.
Like actually, I think about this all the time. I think about it when it comes to like video games or whatever. There's some of the best games that have been made in the last 5 years are like ROM hacks and things that were created by internet communities where not only did they do it for no money, but it's like actually illegal. Where like they could be sued and get a cease and desist letter for doing what they're doing, but they're doing it for the love of the game. You know, people make mods of all sorts of things. People produce so much value for no compensation at all.
Right. Well, but and the thing is, they're still doing it out of an interest, like even if they enjoy it, they're still doing it out of like a degree of self interest, right?
Yeah, I'm
Often.
saying elective affinity, but in fact, also those products end up being better in a lot of cases than the ones that are made for the profit motive. Like, look at the latest Pokemon game, right? The latest Pokemon game, everyone fucking hated because it was a complete like rush job in order just to make money and capitalize on the IP. Meanwhile, there's like myriad ROM hacks in the Pokemon community of people who are like, hey, I have a novel idea or take on how we could do this. And they produce their own fucking thing that's way more interesting and way more innovative on a technical level, like of gameplay, et cetera, than any of the things that the Nintendo Corporation's doing.
Mm-hmm. Right. No, all right. This is an interesting take. Yeah, I hadn't thought about it from this perspective. Because yeah, if you look at like the software community, it is kind of like an exercise in thinking like, okay, how do people behave when they don't have, when everybody has the same access to resources? But the thing is, you still end up with this like enormous power law, right? Of like mega contributors, right?
Sure, but that's fine. Like that's true of the Olympics too. But it's like that doesn't mean like so like. But that's also doesn't mean that you only do something to be the best. There's a lot of people who like do MMA or like go to the gym or whatever, and they're not trying to be weightlifters or MMA fighters. They're just doing it for the love of the game. You know, they just like doing the thing. They don't have to be the number one person for it to be satisfying. Like you know, I like doing a lot of things that I'm not the best at. You know, or like I like if I'm playing tennis with my friends or whatever, I get really into tennis or something. I'm not trying to be fucking Roger Federer.
Right. Right. Yeah, I guess then like it's like what is the ultimate goal then of a given society? Because you could
Be
say that
fruitful and
like
multiply,
okay, fair enough. Yeah,
just to create
but
more flourishing. You know, like I don't know, like what like if you live it like let's say you like live in your community or whatever, and you got all this free time. You look around, there's trash around. You're like, oh, what the fuck? We should do something about this. I don't want to walk around in the streets. So you fucking start sweeping up the streets. And you organize this fucking volunteer street sweeping thing. And you get beers after work or beers after doing it or whatever. People do this shit all the time. Like people organize things all the time when they have the free time and the resources if they have a surplus. I just think that like we have a sort of ideological skepticism towards our own neighbors because we have a very low trust society. So people are like, well, I know what I would do okay with all this free time and stuff, but I don't trust those people. And that's been your argument this whole time where you're like, well, I think that my neighbors, if you gave them, if you paid off their debts and they didn't have to work, they'd probably just do drugs and kill themselves. Like, so you're like,
yeah,
we might as well not even try. It's actually probably for the best that we keep them enslaved because it gives them a reason to exist.
right. Yeah, no, I think the thing is
I
I'm
think that's
still
fucked
not.
up.
It's totally fucked up, but like it doesn't seem like I'm still not convinced that people wouldn't do that.
But
Like
maybe some would. But like, what's that to you, man?
because it makes the society that you're living in worse, and
I
it's
don't know if
also
we could make the society I'm living in right now worse on that level because I can just look out my apartment right here to the commons and I just see a swarm of homeless people all fucking doing drugs and they have nothing. So I don't know how this system is making it so that like they're given something productive to do.
right. But the thing is like this is a group of people who is like is a much smaller set of the population
It's bigger
that's
every
like
year.
yeah, but like in a society where everybody has like where the bar of comfort is like a much the bar of activity to meet comfort is so much lower. You know, you're going to have much more people who are not like actively moving themselves towards anything and becoming idle, right?
What's
Like
wrong with
in
that? Okay, well, like, what's idle? Let's say, like, you got this guy, he's got his apartment paid off or whatever, he doesn't have a job, and he's just like, what does he do all day? Is he going to game? Like, what's he doing? Okay, let's say he's doing that. Okay, well, then he's like in a community of people doing this sort of thing, and he's like, okay, on this Discord server, I'm going to become a mod of this, whatever. People fucking spend so much time and work organizing over things that you might consider to be trivial or stupid, but that's not really up for you to judge. Like, I don't know, if someone wants to just spend their whole life looking at pornography and then die, like, I don't know, they can do that. I would probably say that's a waste of time, but I'm not going to be like, like, I don't know, what do you want to do about it? You want to police everyone's habits? You want to have a cop everywhere being like, hey, you're not being productive enough, and have them knock you over the head? I don't know. I don't think that's very good.
Yeah, but I mean, but you're also advocating like a similar degree of policing to prevent people from working even when they want to.
No. They can work for free. I'm saying that there's a certain amount of, like, if you're going to be working for a corporation, if you're going to be working for an employer, like someone's employing you, then they just can't employ you beyond a certain amount of hours.
They can't pay you beyond a certain amount of hours anyway. Like if somebody
Well,
could
they can't
work,
employ
they
you.
could.
Well, it's like, okay, like let's say you want to just do it out of the goodness, the sake of your own interest or whatever. Like you're a carpenter and you're like, oh, I can make these great cabinets. No one wants them. And someone's like, hey, you want to make this cabinet for me? And you're like, okay, sure. And you do, just for the sake thereof. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of
Right.
people who do a lot of work just for their own sake, for the sake of doing it, because they enjoy doing it.
Certainly,
Like that's like
but
the
like
ideal.
a lot of these
like
people
that's
seem
honestly
to
what
be.
people want. Like that's what like and honestly that's why that's the justification for the system we have now. Where go okay, well you're at least free to pursue your own interests. Like you can go try any of these things, right? So I'm just saying why not like I'm saying like communism is only possible after capitalism. Like capitalism has to exist in order to create the conditions for communism's inevitability. So all of these things that are great that exist in capitalism would be made even better under communism.
Right, but like you wouldn't have like the dynamics that are that like create these circumstances of capitalism like would be eliminated under communism, in which there's certainly people who exist who are working like who are working financially like because like for financial compensation, right? Ultimately, and these people go on to create great things for the world around them.
Like
And there's
who?
also people on the other side of it. Well, so I'm just trying to think of shit. So I would be very unsurprised if there's like a great number of artists who are who like don't produce music unless they feel that they'll be like fairly and fully compensated for it. Right?
Well, most artists, if you're talking about musicians, they only make their
Yeah.
money touring. So they would only tour to make money, probably, but they make music and generally have to put it out for free for a very long time in order to just garner interest so that people would attend them when they tour, which is how they actually make money. I can't think of a single artist, big artist now, who doesn't put out most of their stuff for free.
Right,
Like,
but that's because the market forces them to. It's basically an advertisement for their tour.
yeah. So I think that's fine. I
Right,
think
but
that
like,
music should be made freely. I
right,
make music for fun.
sure, no, and that's great. But my point is that like there are certainly like great works that like probably would not be created if not for that financial compensation.
Right now, I mean, there's sure, I guess, but there's also tons of great work that just exists because people made it for free.
Certainly, but my point
Or
is
like
that
at a
like in
loss.
that.
Actually, I
Sure.
think the most great artists, like if you want to, like some of my favorites, like Herman Melville or William Blake, they fucking made no money doing that shit. They lost money.
Right. But like the argument that I'm making is not that no good work could be produced under conditions of communism. My point is that there are works that could not be produced if not for capitalism. Like
Sure, I'm saying communism couldn't be produced if not for capitalism.
sure, but I'm not disagreeing with that. I'm just saying that I don't know if that goal is even ideal. If the goal of this is just to have as many humans surviving
Free.
as possible.
Not just
Yeah,
surviving,
I
but
don't know if that's
thriving.
even I don't even know. Well, thriving is because so in this situation you'd still have people working to a certain degree that on whatever it is that they wanted, and that's all great. But there's probably a level of excellence that only exists because of the negative pressure of
I don't think so.
capitalism. You don't think that there's any work that people do for compensation that is of quality
If you could
that
give
they
me an
wouldn't otherwise do? I mean, that's hard to think of off the top of one's head, right? You'd have to examine the
know.
personal motivations of
I'm saying look at
say
the Manhattan Project or something. You want
sure.
to say the nuclear bomb? Was that made by capitalism?
No, that's not a counterexample. I'm saying that good work can be done without the pressures of capitalism. I'm saying that there's certain work. So here's a good example.
That's what I'm saying.
Here's
You
a
have
good
to give me a good
example.
example.
Yeah. So So if you talk to like many software engineers, they'll say like free and open source software is great, but often like a paid version will be better. And the reason is that like you'll have like this financial pressure that makes people want to produce something that is like sufficient, of that sufficient level of quality, right? So you wouldn't have that sufficient level of quality if not for that negative financial pressure. So like, yeah, are you
or the
enslaving
financial
people?
pressure
Yeah.
is just how you in this dispensation attract the most talent.
Sure, but like that, like there's work that that
But maybe
wouldn't
the
be done if
talent should
not
be
for the
free
financial compensation.
instead of just going towards whatever would compensate them more to pursue what they found to be the most worthwhile use of their time.
Yeah, but these aren't people who are like struggling to pay their rent or anything. This is money that they're like that. This is like additional funds. These are not people in need of additional
Yeah,
resources because, yeah. So like these are like this is additional motivation beyond necessity.
yeah. So then it's not even really about the money then.
No, it absolutely is about the money. It's just not about need.
So then what? Like,
It's
but is
about
it
like
like
it's about people who are motivated
prestige
by
then?
no greed, like just wanting more resources than they otherwise would have.
But why?
I don't know what do you mean? Like why are people are greedy?
So it's like,
Is
let's
that
say
what
you
you're
have
asking?
like you've got your basic level, like, you know, you're doing fine, you got money in
Yeah,
your fucking savings, you could
yeah,
retire if you want to, but you
yeah.
work on this project, this paid version of a thing or whatever that is based ultimately on open source stuff. Like, why do you do it?
For
Is it
money.
really for the money? Is it really just for the money? Is it really because it's like because they like working on things?
Well, I mean, they certainly like working on it, but they definitely like there's definitely projects that wouldn't exist if not for the money that they would be making.
Like what?
I mean, I'm like I could go like if you like talking about like several startup projects, it's like software projects, free, paid versions of open source things.
Like what?
Uh,
Like what's like a thing? An example?
um, I mean, like basically any like purely SaaS startup could be characterized this way. Here's an example like the Things app. So there's this like really nice to do app called Things, and it's just like has like a bunch of like keyboard macros and all these things that are like a pain in the ass to program for Apple for using Swift. Like that app, like there's a million free like iOS to do apps. In fact, it's like one of the first things you learn how to do in Swift is like how to write a
Yeah.
to do app. And like a couple of guys like came together and like wrote one that costs $50 to download, and it's like way more expensive but a lot better. And things
Yeah.
like that wouldn't exist if not for that financial pressure.
Well, why does it like? Do you think that they made it to make money, or do you think that they made it because they thought all the other ones sucked?
I mean, but like I'm saying that those things don't seem mutually exclusive to me. Like
I'm not
they
saying they're
saw a
mutually
version that could be
exclusive,
better.
but I'm saying like, what's like the primary motivator there? Because you're saying again, these are all people who probably don't need to be making that money, right? Like it's not even necessary. But it's like maybe at that point, putting a $50 price tag on it is a bit of a flex, saying like, hey, ours is so much better that we can put a price tag on this and it's worth it. But if all of them had been forced to be free, like let's say that like we just lived in like the Apple economy was communist,
Sure,
so that all of the apps were free and there were no ads or whatever. So there was no
totally.
option to make like a paid for app. Do you think there'd be any pressure to make one that's better than the other ones?
Well, it depends. I mean, there's certainly going to be like some apps that exist that are like that continue to get better out of like just creative interest and like wanting the prestige, the name recognition, or just out of pure enjoyment of like making the best thing. Like that certainly exists, and you see that in the free and open source software market. But you still end up with like some like dynamics where like the best version of a thing is like the paid version, and the person is motivated by money.
Well, you were saying that they're not only motivated by money. Because if they were only motivated by money, then it would be because they would need this to replicate their means of existence. But you're saying that these are people who are working above and beyond
Yeah.
their basic needs. So, right,
No, but
like,
that is being motivated by money. Like it's still like it's not being motivated out of desperation, but it's still
well, that's what
motivated
I
by
mean. So
money.
then maybe the money then has become just a way of determining prestige in this society. So it's like actually like what's the difference between making like what's the difference in a marginal utility between having $50 billion and $5 billion? Well, you have a lot more prestige in amongst the class of billionaires if you have
Right.
50 billion as opposed to 5 billion. But in comparison to the, so you could say that so the person who has $5 billion, who's motivated to make 45 billion more dollars, so that he has $50 billion, is motivated by money. But I would say he's actually motivated by prestige.
So, but you're also then like, would you advocate for the elimination of that motivation
No, because
under
the
communism?
prestige would always be there. It would just be for different things. It wouldn't be the prestige of having more money. It would be the prestige of having more recognition from society.
But isn't this dynamic also responsible for like some of the costs that people would typically associate with capitalism, which is that the best version of something is something that not everybody can afford? Because you have to offer some sort of like it needs to cost, like part of the prestige, right, comes from the fact that people are sacrificing something for access to the like the better output of somebody who could make something that
Do
they
you think
themselves
that
couldn't.
if a billionaire spends $50 on an app, that's a sacrifice?
It's a bigger sacrifice than paying zero. Yeah.
I think it's negligible to the billionaire. I don't think they could tell the difference.
Yeah, but like
Phenomenologically.
if everybody then is a billionaire, right, in this
So then everything would be free.
Yeah, then everything would be free, but you'd also lose that motivation to make things that are like that are paid, right?
Well,
that like
nothing would be paid, but you wouldn't lose the motivation to make something better than other things.
Yes, I
That
think that you
motivation
would.
is prestige, and it's
Yeah,
not
because
money.
that prestige gets eliminated because you have like this
No.
conditional prestige
See,
on sacrifice.
See, this is what I'm saying is you can't imagine any type of value other
Sure.
than money.
No, I'm just saying that like no, I absolutely can because like all you're saying like in this example, money is not like it's not about the money itself, it's about the representation of money, which is like the prestige of somebody else sacrificing something for the quality of output that you uniquely offer. Right? Like that is absolutely something that I'm personally interested in and I know many others are. Like, is it selfish? Absolutely. But it's also probably responsible for the creation of things that are beautiful.
It's also responsible for things that are not beautiful, though. Maybe
Totally.
there's like a lot of garbage that's made for that reason as well, right?
Yeah,
like,
but I don't really care about those things. I guess my point is that, like, if your society is tasked with making, like, as many of the most beautiful things as possible, like, that is, to me, a higher aim aesthetic than
I think that's
equality
communism.
or lack of want. That's
I think
communism
you could only
too?
have that. I think you could only have that under communism.
That. See, I don't understand how you can make those claims simultaneously.
Because
right?
basically, like, who's to say that the most beautiful thing is the thing that makes the most money?
Because it requires sacrifice of others to access it.
Why? Okay, so if you pay $50 to see a movie and
Yeah.
there's another movie that you can watch for free, does that mean the one you paid $50 for is better than the one you watched for free?
Over enough trials, yeah, probably.
I just mean in any instance.
In a specific instance, without having seen the movie ahead of time, no. But like if you you build that reputation over time, maybe you read a review or something, and on that basis you go see the $50 movie, then yes. Or maybe you choose to see it a second time, and that validates that you knew what it is that you were buying. Yeah, totally.
Well, I'm just saying for my own experience here, there's been a lot of books that I paid money for and paid a lot of money for, and then I've read most books for free. And
Right.
I cannot tell you that I enjoyed the ones that I paid more for more than the ones I've read for free, or that
Sure.
there's even a correlation.
Right, but like in these examples, right? Like okay, so to use this example, right? You'd have like a better representation of the idea that I'm putting forward is that some of those books of the paid ones wouldn't have been produced except for that negative financial pressure, that like requirement of sacrifice, or even those books that you read for free. The reason those books were produced in the first place could have only only could have happened if the person had received sufficient like pressure of
Okay. So I'm gonna
like
so like
negative affect.
let's look at the #1 best-selling book of all time.
The Bible?
Ubiquitous copies everywhere. Was the Bible put together for money? Did people write it for monetary
No,
compensation?
obviously not. I'm not. The thing is, this isn't a counterexample. Like I'm saying that there
It's
are
like
things that
if we're
wouldn't
going to talk
exist if
about
not
the
for
book, if we talk
sacrifice.
about the
Yeah.
book as an object, the Bible is the book,
Yeah.
right? Probably like more than any other book. It was not written at any point for monetary compensation. The text itself or the translations thereof or the commentary thereof was not done explicitly for monetary compensation, and yet it still outcompetes the entire corpus of literature and books that have been written for monetary compensation.
Right. Totally.
So that's how I see things. Like, so maybe you're right in that there's a lot of things that have been made for monetary compensation that are nonetheless good or even great. But I don't think that the fact that they were written for monetary compensation is the thing that made them good or great. I think often, like, there is a sense in which restrictions of any sort lead to a type of creativity, or like, let's say you had budget constraints on your movie, so you had to develop some type of thing in order to make it look good on the budget that you were given or whatever, things like that. So there but like that doesn't mean that, so then it would mean that you could have that the money both avails this type of potential, but it can also, the lack of money can also avail this type of potential, where if you do more with less, you might make something more interesting than if you had been given every thing at your disposal.
Right, and I mean, there's several examples of this, right? Where you have artists who create not out of like not out of want, but out of like just like
Love of the game.
resource availability, yeah, or love of the game. Absolutely, and many great works are produced that way. The only thing that I'm saying, like I'm making a very very small argument here, is that there is art which does exist that only exists because of that prestige, which is offered only through the sacrifice of others
I'm saying
paying for it.
that when you say only there, that is a very strong claim that I don't think can be backed up. That's basically just like a type of like that's like your assumption here about reality is that this monetary impulse is what is solely determinative here, but I don't think that's the case. I think that that's incidental to the
Yeah.
conditions. But if we can imagine other conditions, I don't think that means like for instance, look at like Tolstoy or something, right? He wrote War and Peace. He didn't make any money writing it. Nothing. He was already rich.
Right. But okay, so here's a counter. How about David Hume, right? Like David Hume was like became like extremely opulent through the course of his work, and he wrote like I think in his journals he detailed that there were books that he produced to increase his wealth, and those are books that we read to this day, right?
Sure.
Like
So I'm saying then the difference there is incidental. It's not causative or determinative.
How is it? But like it seems determinative in that like he wrote because he wanted to earn this additional money and become more opulent, right?
Okay,
Have that
but
great
that
financial
doesn't.
independence.
But that doesn't mean that writing for that is what made it good. I'm saying that's incidental because there's a lot of people
Oh
who
yeah,
wrote a
no,
lot
that's
of
what makes
books
it good for
solely to
sure.
make.
But it's works
No,
that would have otherwise been produced.
There's even more books from that same time that people wrote just to make money, and they did make money off of them, and you don't even know what they are.
Oh, totally. But you'll still get those works produced under capitalism. You just won't get like this other latter part of books which are only produced like for like financial compensation. Otherwise, right?
Sure.
So there's a pool of books there's a pool of works, artistic works, creative works, intellectual works that like is otherwise not produced except for like advantageous that. You think that those conditions would be eliminated?
All of this is within a particular moment in history. It's not like this. You're taking this particular moment in history and you're abstracting it out to be a universal law over like eternity. which is, I think, like the fundamental, like you're making. That's why I'm saying it's a strong claim that I think I would have to reject on this level, because
Hmm.
that, like, yes, there's also like you wouldn't be making you wouldn't be hunting for your food with a poison blow dart if you had a musket. You know what I'm saying? That doesn't mean that what is that how do I put this? You're saying that this class of works, like David Hume's, the ones that David Hume wrote for money, wouldn't have been produced had David Hume lived in a communist society.
Hmm.
Okay. But the communist society is only possible after the existence of the society in which David Hume lived in. So all of these things that you're saying are producing the possibility of their sublation. Like it's not a steady state of the world. Like we're in a dialectically evolving world such that these categories are not stable, but they're also changing in at the same speed and within the same relations as the rest of society, as the rest of the world, as history is.
Hmm. So, like, you're saying that, like, are you saying that the way it is that I'm evaluating those works of David Hume, it becomes obviated outside of this moment, or are you
Okay, let's say
or
that we brought David Hume back right now.
yeah, yeah,
David Hume is here with us in 2023, and we
sure.
go, "Hey, write that book you wrote again."
And he wouldn't, is what you're saying.
Why would he? It's already been written.
Okay, so you're saying that, like, the process of, like, the historical event, the necessarily historical event of capitalism will, like, by like every possible definition, can produce all of the works which have and will be produced through capitalism. There's no randomness to it, and then on the other side of it, like, like, this isn't anything to complain about, because by the time that we reach this communism, all those works will have been produced, and there's nothing that will really be lost. There's no opportunity cost.
Yes, pretty much.
That's like, man, that's like, are you like a Calvinist or something? Like, what is this? This is like
Kind of.
very,
I'm like definitely
okay.
I'm like a
Yeah.
radical. I'm more radical than Calvin. I would have been burned at the stake by Calvin. I'm
So
like
because, like, this is very prescriptive. Like, you're saying that, like,
trust the plan.
every action is basically codified in advance.
Yeah, we already know the end.
All right. That's
It's been
wild.
revealed to us.
That's a pretty. All right. I mean, there's no way that I could, like, disabuse. Disabuse is the wrong term. There's no way that I can convince you that that's not the case. I'm sure, but
No.
but yeah. So that's. I mean, that's a pretty like root impasse. Like, because
Yeah, I'm not making an argument.
if you take that premise, it's very hard to, like, to reach common ground on, like, many other kind of disputes that you and I
No,
might
see,
have.
my
Yeah.
premise here is that I'm making this speech right now
Yeah.
about this, and in the future, when it comes about, it won't matter what the arguments were
Right.
against what I'm saying, because the only evidence is in the future.
Yeah. Well.
So
Okay, but, like, on what basis are you making this evaluation that, like, all these things are
it came
set
to
in
me in a
stone?
dream. I don't know. What do you want me to point to?
I don't know, because that's like a very, like, that's a like you're arriving at, like, a very specific understanding of the way that the world works that is very different than I think most other people would understand it. Right? That, like, you're
sure.
saying that there is no free will, that there is no randomness.
No, there is free will. Why would there be no free will?
Okay, because you're saying that all of these things are determined in advance. Like how
sort of
how
like
does one
saying,
have
like,
both free will and, like, determination?
does a seed have free will to, like, grow into a tree?
Does it? No, a seed is subject to, like, the whims of the world around it, like the trajectory of its growth, right? Like the wind patterns, the sun, how much water it receives, all these other things.
So humanity is unique in the sense that, like, we're capable of transforming our own conditions around us, right?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So then we create these and then these conditions then change us.
Well, I mean, these things are like mutually informative, right? Like,
Yeah, there's like a
just
dialectical thing here. It's like we
yeah,
create this technology, and then this technology creates us, and then we create the next technology, etc. Like
yeah,
we're constantly overcoming ourselves.
right. But like like using the David Hume example, that you can conceive of like a million different permutations of that work that he could have produced that would have still satisfied the conditions of the world around him that
There's
pressured
only
him
one
into
world
that.
though. Now you're talking about like a sort of simulated multiverse, and you could create a simulated multiverse where you premise or speculate that that's the case. But there's only one David Hume. There was only one moment that he was in, and he only wrote the books that he wrote.
No, as prologue, not as like, and not after the fact. Like there's a million different universes after he writes these million different
See, I disagree.
permutations of
I
that
don't. I
book.
don't believe in the multiverse.
No, I'm saying that like okay, so I'm offering this conversation with you right now. There's a universe. There's a theoretical universe in which I
Sure,
don't enter this
there's a theoretical
conversation.
universe where we're all made out of cotton candy, also, but like
Yeah,
that's not a
totally. But
real
like, I'm
universe.
not talking about like. I'm just saying that like, I'm not saying that those universes exist in any sort of meaningful way. I'm just saying that like that I still have a choice in the way in which I engage with the world around me, which means that the course of the universe is not like necessarily like set in stone. That it's not predetermined, right? Like I can do one thing or another thing.
Sure, but after you've done it, you could do nothing but have done it.
Yeah, totally. But that
Precisely.
still means that like if I just decide that like that a society should be run one way versus another way, I am pruning like the fruits of that other tree.
You don't get to decide that, though. No single person gets to decide that.
I think that people have like a pretty great effect on the world around them, right? Like
Yeah,
there are
collectively,
definitely
yeah.
fruits of trees that we're not tasting because of like the choices of Napoleon or Charlemagne, like
Sure,
like
maybe.
there are totally like Hitler of like any like major figure throughout history that like determine the way in which we live day to day now.
Sure, but after the fact, it could have been no other way than what it was.
Yeah, absolutely. But like until that point, one still has choice, and I think that
You only
like
have choice right now.
yeah,
But
but
the
that
result of your
matters.
choices, whatever your choices are, their results are already determined in the end.
Yeah, it seems like like I don't understand the significance of the point that you're making here because still I have choice that choice has
I'm
value,
telling
and
you,
I should
this
think
is what
about
I'm
these
saying.
things.
No matter what choices people make on an individual level in this society, this mode of production will not exist forever. And in the future, it will be overcome. No
Oh no,
matter
that
what
I buy.
people individually decide right now or how they choose to engage with it.
Right. Well, but that's like a weaker claim than total predetermination, right? Like you
I'm
could
not a
say that like
exactly. That's what I'm saying. I'm not like a
yeah
total predetermined. Like
yeah
this is like a thing Dante actually clears up, but I feel like people haven't fully understood his argument, where he describes like God as being like someone watching a like humanity like in their free will, right? And by doing things, he's observing, but he doesn't determine. Just because he knows where things are going to go, doesn't mean that he's changing the path by having foreknowledge of where things ultimately go. Like, so this isn't, it's not like there's something that is predetermining um, the development of mankind or something, right? It's not like like that we're being acted upon by some force. It's just that there is a reason, there is a logic, there is a kind of innate necessity to how things will ultimately end. So with that in mind, you can see what role people are playing towards that end. But if you do not posit that this end exists and that there is just an infinite openness to things, then there's no real point in discourse at all. Because then you can't say anything about anything. Because anything could become anything or mean anything, and in some hypothetical, theoretical universe.
But like, I still don't get how this changes the significance of an individual choice of whether and how to drive the history that's about to unlay in front of them, right?
All that matters is to the future. like matters how. Like you can do whatever you want right now, right? You can like
Totally.
you're talking to me. How will this impact everything? And we have no way of knowing.
Yeah, but like I mean, it's like I have no way of knowing, but I can evaluate the world as it's been laid before me, and read history, yada yada yada, and then on that basis make decisions about the future in which I choose to try to create.
Sure,
Right.
and then you could also just get nuked, or you could get stabbed on the street or something. You know, anything could
Sure,
happen.
totally. Yeah, but that doesn't mean that you don't like that doesn't mean that okay, so that's a crossing out of a potential example, but like without those positive affirmative choices, you are eliminating like every possible like future universe in which that circumstance that you've predetermined exists, right?
See,
So
again, once more, you're describing things as if like the present leads to as like this open like garden of forking paths where who know like we're making these decisions now which are going to determine what the future is. What I'm saying is that these decisions that we're like, oh, we're in charge and we're making these determinative decisions about how the future is going to look are ultimately still out of our own hands. And there is a kind of ironical predicament to that, like to this, where for instance, we're like we're gonna destroy the Soviet, we're gonna fight the Soviet Union, et cetera, so that we can have the free world. And then in doing so, we produce a system that's the exact same as the Soviet Union, right? And then it turns out that like this system is also going to collapse in the exact same way for the same reasons, even though that wasn't the intention of anyone doing that. Or as I talked about, like Ron Paul, he wants to make a world where we end the Fed. In order to do that, which I think will happen someday, eventually, the Fed will not exist. Um, it'll have to be through some like means that he would never consider. This is like the sort of irony of being a human being, is that you go, hey, I'm going to like you don't have perfect foreknowledge of how what you're doing is going to of how it's going to change things or what it's going to affect in the future. And oftentimes, I would say very often, um, you end up accomplishing means and ends, et cetera, that you were completely unconscious of.
so is your argument then that's like futile or that it's like uninteresting?
That what is futile or uninteresting?
That like one's choice, one's like hopeful choices around like your actions that you're hoping will result in some sort of like circumstance that you're aiming for, right?
I think they're just like anything else. I think that's how everyone does everything. You know, it's like where
Right.
it's like I'm going to the grocery store because I'm hoping I can get this thing, and if they don't have it, they don't have it. If they do have it, they do have it. I don't know. Like, you know, I wrote a book hoping that X, Y, or Z would happen with it, but when you end up just discovering what actually does happen, you don't have the ability to know exactly how it's going to be used or like what it's going to be. You just like you can be motivated to do one thing for one reason, and then after having done it, discover that you were actually doing it for other reasons.
Right. Well, I mean, but like, okay, but then there are like conceivable like results of that you may find more or less desirable, even if it is like very unlikely that the specific structure of those things will change. Like I can put I can put money into the S&P 500, not know like what like on what days it'll go up or down or whatever, but it's still like relatively monotonically over a longer scale trend up.
Okay, but then what if we go to full World War III with China and a bunch of nukes go off and it ends up EMPing the entire grid and there is no stock market anymore?
Sure. Well, it's still like
So
a
then it's
better.
like, okay, well, there's like these black swans, and then there's like all these other things that are these other contexts that are outside of that context you just described, which could impact the context you just described. So it's like
Sure.
you'd have to say that you'd have perfect foreknowledge of everything in the world,
No,
but no one has that.
no, you just have to like assume that it's like that this is like reasonably more likely than something else
Okay, but those assumptions are based on what?
on the history that we've understood before us. Yeah.
Exactly, based off of your analysis of things that have already happened. But that doesn't mean that there's nothing that will happen that hasn't already happened before. Things that have never happened before happen all the time.
Oh, totally. But like you can also like say that that's a probability for which you're accounting. Most of the time, most days are normal.
Okay, but that doesn't matter. It's like Lenin said, there are some centuries where nothing happens, and then there are some years where centuries happen.
Yeah, totally. But like, what do you do? Do you plan and like move about the world as if like this year is that century year? No, you like
Well, the way I live, I don't know. You can speak for yourself, but I'm open to the possibility of anything.
okay, got it. So you're like sitting in a bunker right now, like armed to the teeth.
Oh no. I'm not worried. See, I'm not. I don't fear.
Okay,
anything.
so what is the manner in which you're preparing for this century year? I'm like genuine.
I'm
I'm
doing
not
this.
asking this in a trollful way. I'm like genuinely curious.
I'm doing this right now.
Okay, so how does this prepare you for the century year that you're like expecting might happen?
I think it already did happen. I think 2020 was one of those years.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, so this is so then this is like the aftermath of it.
Yeah, so like I've spent a long time like
this is in
analyzing
1917.
Like, how did we get to this point and like where are things headed. I think things like I'm generally looking at like trends where I think like things are going to take a long time to go the way that I think that they will. But I think that it is inevitably going in that direction. I don't know if I'll live to see it, but
what's that? And that ultimate direction is like fully automated communism.
Yeah, maybe that'll take 100 years, 150 years, 200 years. I don't know, but I think that's the inevitability.
It just seems like people are going to be a lot more. It's going to be a lot more likely that people are just going to fully exert themselves as much as possible and totally enslave themselves for like just the most minute drip of additional dopamine.
Okay, and then that's exactly where we're at, right? Like now.
Yeah.
So then, do you think that this is just how things are going to be forever?
No, I just think that like it's not a state; it's a force. I think that like we can like continue breaking down the this platonic idea of the human organism, right, into smaller and smaller bits, where you're like you absolutely like you enslave every cell of your body, and every single like traditional aspect of the world just completely gets corrupted and perverted and whored out. Like things can absolutely get worse.
Well, I didn't say that things are going to get better immediately. I think that here, I think it also depends on where you are. For instance, if you're in Northwest Africa right now, you're like, wow, the future's open. We're kicking out the French military. We're going to seize all of our natural resources. We're making trade deals with the Chinese. We'll be able to nationalize our wealth here and create better living conditions, et cetera, et cetera. So this is all like if you're taking a global like geopolitical world historical view of things, it really depends on like when you're saying things getting better, things getting worse. Really depends on where you are and what your context is. Mm-hmm. Like this sort of pessimism you describe is much more common in the Anglosphere in the West, and et cetera, than it is in China. The Chinese are very optimistic about the future.
Right, but like it does seem that like things generally are generally trending toward our area of existence, where
I don't think so. I think that I think we're seeing right now is like we're seeing the beginning of an era where people of multipolarity, where this unipolar dominance of like NATO and things like the Bank of International Settlements and the World Bank and the UN and the IMF, et cetera, et cetera. I think that's on the wane.
Well, yeah, but that is a different structure of like non-permanent entities than it is this almost like unique force of technology and of egalitarianism.
I don't think technology has its own. I don't think technology has its own teleology aside from what we give it.
You don't think that yeah, sure, but like we have innate we have innate forces ourselves that we codify into the technology that we
So what do you think things will be like in 100 years?
I mean, I think that basically people will be born into like a form of very into a very spiritual and biological slavery. They're constantly pushing as many buttons as possible, selling as many facets of their soul and physical being to try to chase replicants of stimuli that like seem to
That
represent
seems to me
our
like you're
needs.
describing the present. It doesn't seem like 100 years from now. That seems to me what's already happening.
Absolutely, I think that things can get
So
worse.
nothing will change. Things
No,
will
I
just
think
get worse. That's
no,
the future.
okay. Well, I guess I haven't thought past. I don't know how we get past this point. I think
See, I
basically
do. See, this is what
eventually
I'm
the
thinking about is how we
okay.
get
So how
past
do you
this
get to the
point.
other side of that point? I'm curious. What do you mean?
Well, in the West here, we're gonna have to have a revolution.
Yeah, okay, but like, how are we going to have like the physical like this physical structure, this physical strength to overcome our own like biological slavery?
What do
You
you mean by
know,
biological slavery?
like where we basically like like
Like you got
in
to
the
eat
same way
and
that
like
we
shit.
no. Sorry, no, I mean like in the same way that like we're like women are selling off their wombs through surrogacy. We're selling off people are like people
Yeah, I
sell
think
their
people are
plasma,
gonna.
all these different things.
I think
People
people are
sell
gonna
their
push back
attention.
against that.
Yeah, I hope so, but like it seems like I've recently kind of been disabused of this notion that like things necessarily exist on this like sort of like pendulum that assumes like some like odd like central status, some versus like continuing to move as like a force, you know.
I think that if you're looking at stuff like, I think things like that are gonna like when people see the consequences of that, there's gonna be more opposition to it. I mean, you could look at like a lot of like this just tends to people learn things, en masse, sort of like scientifically, where it's like we make these sort of radical leaps or attempts to produce things, then we see what the effects of them are, and then people determine what to do after the fact. So like let's say that we like you're right, and it becomes more and more normative for people to be selling themselves off and like capitalizing themselves in all these ways. I think then at the same time there'll be more and more people who find this to be completely repellent and push back against it.
No, I hope so, and I hope to even be one of these people that you're describing. I've thought about this, but the problem that I think that we're going to run into is that like that's not going to be like a civilizational level change. That seems like it's like a minute population that might like
Here
break
maybe, but
off.
I think that actually globally the vast majority of people see that as completely repellent, which is why
But
you're actually seeing this push against the sort of unipolar order, right? Where you have these people who have been following essentially this notion that whatever is done in the Western world is like extremely enlightened and good for society, and it leads to affluence and increased productivity, blah 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 blah. Whereas that's actually not the case anymore. You got the Chinese, and they're like, well, whatever we want to do, we just want to make sure we don't make the same mistakes America made. Or you got
who's that we? Because a lot of
the
people from
Chinese Communist
China want
Party.
to. I know, but like so many people in China are
Not the
wanting to move
majority, not even
here.
close, not even in the plurality. Those
But
are
okay,
weirdos. In
those are the
Chinese
weirdos.
society, those guys are weird. Yeah,
Okay, but how are they understood?
it's like me. Like in my society, I'm weird for being like I think the Chinese Communist Party is good, right?
It's that okay. So to what I think in the West we understand that as these people being effectively like brainwashed, right? Would you like
Yeah, because we're
disagree that like this is
brainwashed.
sure? I mean but I mean every society will have its like any sufficiently organized society probably has propaganda, right?
Well, sure, yeah.
But like you're not going like to what extent do you think that's actually like representative of reality? Like it seems like China goes to far greater lengths to try to inform and guide the understanding of the world of its populace than we do.
Really?
Yeah,
Really? You don't think we
absolutely.
do that? What about all these
No,
like
we
fact
absolutely
checking
do it.
things, or we got all this like all these intelligence agencies pushing it
That
out? Maybe they
pales in
just do it more
comparison to
openly.
China's actions.
I don't think so. I actually don't think so because we actually have
Chinese
more.
firewalls.
I think the firewall is like okay. So then who develops all of these means to get around the Chinese firewall?
I mean, we
America
do
does. The
often.
intelligence agencies who made Tor,
Sure,
the Department
totally.
of Energy.
Yeah, but I mean Tor, but that wasn't the intent of Tor.
Yeah, it was.
Like, no, the intent of Tor was like to be able to like download information much more
To communicate with their assets
sure.
within other nations, so that they could control other countries.
Mm-hmm. I don't know why Spurgler. Do you know who Spurgler Acolyte is by any chance?
No, I don't.
Okay, so I assume that have you read Oswald Spengler at all?
Yeah.
Okay, so this guy's very, very, very knowledgeable on Oswald Spengler, and he's like waving at me. That might be like him trying to communicate that he's trying to get up here. In which case, if he is requesting, I don't know. I would just recommend he's very good.
Ooh, I don't know though. It's not looking great. We got the anime avatar. We got like a Chud Jack, severe Spenglerian autism. Ooh, I don't know. This looks This looks to me like 2014, like Pol Lit type of person, like 2014. But we're in the year 2023. Spengler discourse is like old shit now. You can get Spengler discourse on fucking like on any of these raw egg nationalist type people or whatever. It's become kind of cliche.
Has it? Oh, okay. So, but there's a level of depth there that's more than like that meme that strong people create good times create weak men create
I've read Spengler.
Yeah.
Listen, man, I'm partially responsible for repopularizing this stuff back in the day. But I appreciate Spengler, but I also don't think Spengler is like, the determinative explainer of all of reality. In fact,
totally. But I'm just saying that he's a good anon as far as anons.
All right, I'll put him on if I must.
All right. Well, it's up to I'm not trying to enforce it, put any requirements in here. I'm just saying he's a good anon. I think that you would enjoy his presence.
Okay. Do you want to be done talking, Will?
I mean, it's up to you. If you're trying to do a one-on-one thing, I'm happy to cede the mic. But I'm also enjoying being up here. It's your space.
Thanks for coming on, man. All right, Spurgler.
It's like wrestling when one of the guys has to tap out and his buddy has to come in and rescue the day.
Yeah, tag team.
Yeah. Well, I first requested because you were talking about causation in history, and that was very interesting. But it seems like you guys are now talking about U.S. hegemony and the decline of.
I feel like the conversation was really more on a kind of transcendental misanthropy in the sense that there this belief that everything's a kind of Gnostic belief that it's everything's just gonna get we're all fucked and we're gonna get taken over by the transhumanist overlords and there's no fighting it, so you might as well buy in, etc.
Well, yeah, that's kind of a sort of eschatological view of history and just an inevitable decline. And it seems like what you're saying is that that sort of very teleological view of history is inappropriate. Is that correct?
Well, I think that it has to be contextual because it's okay, let's say the West is in decline. Does that mean the whole fucking globe is going to be like that forever? I'm not so sure. I do think that we're probably America, the Anglosphere, the West in general is probably going to be going through hard times and probably getting worse. I mean, it's just the trend for the last 50 years or so already is that things have gotten worse. Living standards have declined, et cetera, et cetera. But other parts of the world, that's not the case.
I think that's very fair. I agree with you. I don't know why you have to call me a 2014 lit yak, but
I don't know, because you can do better than Spengler. I mean, I like Spengler, but you should read Joseph Needham.
Sorry, who? Joseph Needham? Yeah, I'm familiar.
Science and Civilization in China.
I'm familiar.
Good stuff.
Yeah, it's great. It was revolutionary. One of the longest extant volumes from Cambridge. I think they're still adding to it.
Yeah, they are. I was just reading the last volume today. And I was like, God damn, this rocks.
Yeah.
Anyway, is there anything you want to talk about specifically? You'll probably be the last person I have on because I got to get off. But
let's see. I mean, when you said you were responsible for the popularization of Spengler, but at the same time you don't like Spengler, expand on that.
No, I'm just being a hipster. I'm saying that a lot of this, there's a kind of meme canon around reading right-wing authors or something. And I would say 2014 to 2018, this got built up. Obviously, BAP was probably the biggest profiteer off of all of that, in the sense that there was a wide movement of people who were hey, we're kind of jaded from this sort of leftist post-Occupy activism sort of stuff, so we're going to start reading all of this other canon and maybe go some other way with it or whatever. And Spengler was a big part of that. If you were in that sphere, that was something everyone was talking about again when he had been sort of out of vogue in the Anglosphere, at least anyway, for a while before that. Pretty much back in the day, 10 years ago, no one Like literally, no one was reading Spengler at all. Like I remember being in college and reading Spengler and trying to talk about Spengler with like professors, and they'd be like, "Well, no one reads that anymore." But now I feel like it's like there's a lot more people who have read Spengler because it's more in the discourse.
That's definitely true. There's an interesting history. If you had gone to even older professors, those who had done their undergraduate
Yes,
degrees,
they would
they
then
would
know.
know.
It comes in and out of fashion. Yeah, because Spengler was like so big that it's like Wittgenstein writes about Spengler. Like everyone had like takes on
Oh, yes.
Spengler or like using that term. Jack Kerouac uses Spenglerian terms all over the place, like stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Heidegger as well.
Yep.
People like Kissinger, they wrote their undergraduate theses on Spengler, and
Yep.
what happened basically was I think it was probably a bit more in the norm for people to be reading Spengler up until about the 70s or so. That's when
Yeah,
you get people like Carl Quigley, kind of like the last real people talking about civilizations in that manner. That were still also educators. People like Bill Clinton studied under Carroll at Georgetown. But
yeah. And what he did is he took it as a fucking like how-to guide. He's like, oh shit, I got to become a Rhodes Scholar and go to Chatham House.
Yeah. Unfortunately, the Rhodes Scholars aren't exactly what Rhodes intended anymore. But oh well.
Well, maybe more so than you'd think. We'll see how they deal with Northwest Africa.
Yeah, what are you anticipating? Are we going to get the Rhodes Scholars being lebased heckin' Caesars in West Africa?
I think that like you're going to have like Pete Buttigieg being like celebrated by neo-Nazis.
That no. Well, okay, I'll give you. Can you explain?
Yeah, he's like a Knight of Malta, like I'm saying, like there's already a bunch of these like rainbow flag NATO stan accounts, etc. And they're going to be more than willing to support interventions in Africa against homophobic, populist authoritarians, etc.
Okay, that's a very interesting definition of neo-Nazi. Then that's one that I wouldn't necessarily share, but I understand what you mean now.
I don't see the difference between them. That's one thing I've come to realize over a long enough time, that there's not really a distinction between these like anarchoid types and the like far rightist, quote unquote, on the internet. They hang out in the same spaces and they have the same sort of temperamental dispositions, and they tend to have the same consumer habits, etc. Like you'll have one person, they both watch the same anime, but they describe what they like about it in two different vocabularies.
Okay, but I still think there's still something to be said for just basic ideological differences.
I think ideological differences like that in the age of the internet are all purely aesthetic. They don't actually mean anything.
Well, you could say all of this is just aesthetic and that nothing actual productive comes of it. So that's fair, I guess.
Well, no. I mean more so like there are like distinctions that are made, but they're not the lines that people would draw like that. Like for instance, if you look at someone like me, I'm hated by both of those groups of people, and they describe me as being members of the opposite thing, but then they end up teaming up to oppose me for being distinct from them, if that makes sense. Like I'm very much disliked by these quote unquote radical leftists. And I'm also quote disliked by these quote unquote radical rightists, and often for the same thing, for the same reason.
That seems like a marketing issue. I don't know. I don't really know who you are, so I can't really speak on this.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm just saying, it's my experience with these internet politics.
Okay. Now you seem very bullish on China, and I actually agree with you. I think if you're a Chinese person, you probably have a lot of reasons to be optimistic about the future of China, but in ways that would also abhor Westerners. So I think you were right on that.
I guess it depends on the Westerner,
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I guess maybe I shouldn't have said Westerner, but people. I guess my followers. I'll make it a camp of us. People like me.
People, fans of constitutional liberal democracy or whatever.
Well, I don't know. Maybe that sort of republicanism would actually, do well in China. There's a lot of arguments to be made that there's a sort of continuation between the CCP and republicanism in China.
Oh, of course, I make that argument all the time.
Yes. Okay. Cool.
Yeah, they're constitutionalists in that sense, in like the Schmittian sense, but not in the sort of like ironical sense I'm using it to mean right now, where I mean like if you're a defender of the West in this day and age, like you're defending Disney World.
Is that really the case? I feel like I'm a pro-Western guy. I don't really watch Disney movies.
What do you mean by pro-Western, though? Like, what is it that you're trying to defend?
I'm an enjoyer of the Western canon. Men like Goethe.
So are the Chinese. They translated all that shit. They really appreciate all of it. They have Goethe institutes over there. They're big fans of Goethe. Xi Jinping is a huge fan of Goethe. Talks about he quoted Faust in German to Angela Merkel.
Yeah, regarding Xi Jinping's education, he was from the first generation of Chinese kids.
Yeah, he was a princeling.
But he was also the first generation of kids after the Cultural Revolution that were even allowed to go to university. And
he wasn't allowed to go to university. He had to go work in the fields. And when he read Goethe, it was because he had walked miles to the library in order to read it.
Yeah. I forget the exact specifics, but there are some stories of him supposedly like reading books in caves by candlelight because...
Yes, you can actually see the picture of the cave that he lived in.
I'm skeptical that this guy was reading much. I think a lot of...
Why? He's a very erudite person if you read his interviews and things like that, and like the people he surrounds himself with. I guess it seems like kind of ridiculous to Westerners to think that like, a leader of the Chinese Communist Party, where we depict them in our imaginary as these sort of like ruthless gangster oligarchs or something, would actually just be like a kind of very civilized person who's interested in these sorts of things.
I'm not trying to denigrate all Chinese people at all and say that it's impossible for them to enjoy the Western canon. But in the case of Xi Jinping himself, I mean, I know like a lot of people that have done research on Xi Jinping's life, and for them, they say it's a question as to whether or not it's like a sort of intellectual affect. I don't have. I guess I should just say I don't have any sort of.
How would one know?
Exactly.
You could say that's true of everything. Know? People say that's true of me. So,
well, Xi Jinping's a bit more of a person worth. No offense.
I just mean, how can you tell the difference between someone who's genuinely interested in the Western canon and someone who's only pretending to be as an affect or whatever?
Fair. I forget how this was relevant to our discussion. I've gone too far down the bio.
Oh, we're talking about Goethe. I was saying, what do you want to defend in the West? And you said, the Western canon. But thankfully, the Western canon is all free. And anyone can have it for free and read it for free.
Let's also go further back into the history of that sort of Western interest in the West in China. Now, this is taken up by people like Yan Fu, if I'm not mistaken. My Chinese late Qing history is a little rusty, but I think it's either Yan Fu or Yan Fu. And there's a book by Benjamin Schwartz where he's talking about, I think maybe it's titled In Search of Wealth and Power, something like that. He talks about the translation movement. A lot of these guys were very much interested in people like Herbert Spencer, social Darwinism, but then also all the great political theorists of the West. And they were very much interested, and they said it rather explicitly quite a few times, use the West to beat the West. And this became a central tension within Chinese intellectual circles. People like Liang Qichao, who very much struggled with adopting some sort of Western ideas, Western techniques, but without losing the Chinese core. And I think consequently, a lot of these sort of interests in the West from the China, it's always been shaded or colored by this obsession with also maintaining authentic Chinese interpretations and identities.
Yeah.
So
that makes sense. Right. Like, I mean, I feel like that's true of like, let's say America's, the early American founders' interest in like Rome and Greece and the British Empire.
That's true. And I would say some of it was a LARP,
Well, yeah, sure. The LARPing is the Boston Tea Party was a LARP until it wasn't.
Okay, I have to go now. There's somebody here. I think the feds are here.
All right. All right, peace. All right, I don't know. That was somewhat interesting. It didn't really go anywhere, but I'm going to get off too. So have a good one, everyone.